like Thomas said, I tend to like the slightly higher price points, only in that they tend to be more profitable, so they make a little bit more sense for me. And really, what I'll say the same thing I said the last time here is that I really want you guys to get the most that you can out of anything that I've got to share. And so it's a pretty diverse group from what I can tell. I was listening to everyone introduce themselves, and there's quite a few beginners, and there's some people that are pretty experienced. And so really what I'd love to do is just be able to help you guys get the most out of whatever it is that you need to do. So if you can, you're welcome to interrupt me. I won't get offended. You can, put questions into the chat and go from there. Now I will say, I'll start off. So everyone clear with that?
Yes, go ahead.
All right. So, I get asked a lot, especially recently, because the market's so frenzied. And one of the most common questions that I get right now is, are we in another bubble? Are we, are we headed for another bubble? It's kind of crazy. There are, some, I will say, similarities to the last time, but not enough to be like what I would consider a bubble. And I will say that I think that our demographics are probably significantly better. I know I remember with Bill, I think it was one of your meetings, we were talking about how the millennials really weren't doing much. And the last go around, the demographics were much different. So you fast forward, what is it? We're now 13, 14 years later, and those millennials are now earning very good money, forming households. They're some of them are now in their 40s. And, they're buying houses and they've got great jobs. And so, when this whole quarantine thing started last time, I know we picked up some very good deals during quarantine. And we made for some interesting inspections, but, for the most part, I was still bullish on the market. I'm still pretty bullish on the market comparatively. I'm a little bit more cautious right now, only in that, I would say that the market really frenzied from January till about April. And I'm seeing inventory levels already start to climb up a little bit from, I think they're low. We were at like 2.8 months, and now we're at 3.3 or 3.4 months the last time I checked. And so when you start to see that, you also start to see some pushback from some of the buyers. And you'll see, whereas, if you go back and look at, February or March, there were very few homes that had any real significant days on the markets. And now you're starting to see that a little bit, and part of that isn't that the market's dropping or that they have to price reduce. Part of it is just pure seller greed, when that they overpriced their properties. And so what I'd seen is, and this is what I continue to see right now, is that the homes that are really sitting are the ones that are, I will say probably overpriced, where they're trying to be the new high comp, and the buyers at this point are saying, hey, let's hold off. Market wise, we're still in a very, for sure, a seller's market. And I think everyone, that's painfully obvious for a lot of people. I've got a friend here who in my neighborhood is trying to buy a house, and we approached one of the properties that was for sale, and he's like, this is, it was probably somewhere between a 2.6 and let's say $3 million house, and he's an all cash buyer, retail side, not a kind of fixer. And we talked to the agent, and I said, he can pay all cash, and he says, look, I got 13 offers, 8 of them are all cash. And I'm like, holy crap, this is on the retail side. And so all of a sudden now you've got, the cash buyer market has really increased significantly on the retail side. And so I'm seeing some of the things that we've sold also go to all cash buyers or significant down payment type buyers. And what that tells us is that, in some cases, like normally we go in and most of my business is fixing and flipping. And, when you sit there and you look at these, the game's changed a little bit from, doing necessarily everything you have to do to the house. Whereas before we would fully fix up the house, to now, the game has changed to where really you're trying to make sure it's financeable and capture that buyer. But the chances are, you're at least, 26% of the buyers are cash buyers. And so some of these buyers are just cash flowing. They're cash flow buyers. They're looking to park some money. There's a lot of fear of inflation right now, and with that fear, people start moving their cash into hard assets like real estate. So that's one of the reasons that you've got so much cash buyer. The stimulus, of course, helped put a lot of money into the marketplace, and and then you've got the fears of 1031s kind of going away, and the administration essentially making some pushes in that direction. And so the people that are thinking of selling, they're trying to finalize their exchanges and do things along those lines. So it's really pushing that I would say the low end type buyers or fixers. It's really making it difficult for buyers that are just solely looking to flip to find more properties. So from an aspect of the marketplace, again, there are opportunities out there, and one of them I have found is both in commercial and also, I will say, multifamily. I think that those are two areas that a lot of people shy away from. One is just from the dollar aspect, and it takes, the barrier of entry is much greater. It's not as investor friendly so far as from a wholesale standpoint. On the resi side of the residential, the single family 1 to 4 type units, you tend to get there's a kind of courtesy that's paid to a lot of the wholesalers and people to tie them up. Not so much on the commercial or the multifamily side. It's much more cutthroat. You have to be, if you're trying to wholesale out one of those buildings, and you go to the commercial people, I will tell you that a lot of the attitude is not, hey, great, I'll give you whatever you want and so forth to take over the deal, as you would with a wholesale deal on the residential side. On the commercial side, they're like, look, I could already tell you're not going to perform. I'm going to wait for you to fall out, and then I'll just buy it. And that's the attitude for a lot of the commercial people if you're trying to wholesale that. Unless you're working with people that are I will call it more wholesale type friendly. And so those are the people that you really want to go to. But the I will say that the multifamily side probably represents one of the biggest opportunities right now, especially coming out of quarantine where the economy is opening back up. And one of the main reasons is that you've got such a simple way to increase the value, if you can increase the income. And so a lot of these owners didn't do any of the rent increases. I personally, I've always loved kind of flipping apartment buildings. I heard someone say that they sold all of their apartment buildings. I will say that personally, that's probably one of my greatest regrets is we bought a ton of buildings in the 90s. I was in my 20s, and like him, and I think it was a young guy, I was kind of sick of managing it. And I'm like, man, I just bought myself a job. Great. We're making some money, but it was kind of, it was too much work for what I wanted to do. And fast forward, 20 years or 30 years, I remember someone bringing me a building that I used to own in the 90s that I paid $225,000 for these 16 units that were all 2 bedrooms in Long Beach. And we flipped it for $637, I think. And we thought we did, we're in our 20s, we thought we did fantastic, right? And lo and behold, somebody comes to me with what they consider a steal, many years later, and they're like, man, I just got this property. I'm only getting it for 1.6 million. I'm like, well, there's $1 million I could have made, right? there's an extra $1 million, and there's that story kind of, I will say, replicates itself with many of the apartment buildings that I got rid of that I wish I would have kept. So hang in there with some of them. Time is your friend with the multifamily if you haven't got rid of all of them. And I realize that some of them tend to be labor intensive. There are better ways of doing it. We're moving into, triple net commercial things that are much lower maintenance.
Hey, Robert, hold on for a second. You got a question. Go ahead.
Sure.
Arthur, go ahead.
Hey, Robert, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good, man. Good. So my question's semi-related. So if I'm bringing a deal to like a high-end investor like you, what do you like to see in the due diligence? So like I'm not wasting my time or sending you bad deals. is there certain things you need to see, or a certain amount of equity, or what type of data you would see if I think I have a property and I want to bring it to a high-end investor and say, hey, we'd like you to invest with us. Is there certain requirements you have, or is it just contingent on the property, or is it more for the sale aspect or the hold aspect? And that way, I have a better education of what to look for when talking to investors.
Yeah. So, if you're talking to investors like myself that are, let's say, interested in joint venturing, and if you bring a deal, we'll split the profits, that type of kind of investor versus a passive, let's say, income or money investor. What I'm really looking for is that, I'm kind of looking for you to tell me the good, the bad, the ugly, the great, the upside, and so the way I value properties, I usually look at it and I say, okay, this is the safe number, this is the expectation, and then this is the upside. And so I don't hone in on like, hey, this is the value, because very rarely is that specific value what you end up selling it for. So one of the things that I track, on every deal that we do, we pull all the comps, obviously, and we register those comps as the comps that we made the decision to go forward with that project as, right? And so when the market changes, one of the problems when you've had rapid appreciation like this is that everyone who's flipping properties thinks they're a genius. And it's like, oh man, yeah, I bought this house and I made this much money. No, the market made you that much money. And okay, good for you for buying it. But the reality is that you should look back at your numbers and see how you would have done had you sold it at the number that you first anticipated on. And so, because the opposite will eventually happen. The opposite will be when you buy it off these comps and then you can't replicate those comps. And some of that is my fear in some of these markets right now, where you had this just really great frenzy that happened, and some of those comps I don't think are going to be replicated. For some of these investors who based it on the highest value plus. It's like, well, this is kind of wholesaling 101, right? They take, forgive me for saying this, but a lot of wholesalers, not all, there's some great wholesalers out there that look out for people, but a lot of them are kind of soft con artists. Where it's like they take the highest comp, add 10% because the market's that great and you're going to do fantastic with it. And then they deflate the value of the repairs. And then they try to make their spread, right? And so that's a lot of the wholesale deals that I see. So I tend not to fall into that trap, in that I don't mind looking at the highest comp as long as it's comparable, but I look at everything as a buyer. And so when you come to me with a deal, I hope that rather than trying to sell the deal to me, right? If you're like, well, here, so I'll give you this example. So Google has a way, they get approached with joint ventures all the time. One of their things that they do that's really unique, I think, in that tech world, is that they bonus their people on how to kill the opportunities. And so if you can come up with a reason why they shouldn't invest this money in whatever company and why that's going to be a loss, you get a bonus. And so I kind of look at deals that way. It's not that I'm trying to kill deals, but what I'm concerned, the scariest thing for an investor is that you don't see the problems with it, like the risk. We're big boys. We're going to make a decision based on risk. We don't expect there to be like no risk, obviously, right? We're making money for a risk that exists. And so if you're sitting there telling your investors, hey, this is great, this is a sure thing, I already know you're missing stuff, because nothing's a sure thing, right? And so the biggest fear for an investor is that, I know what I know, right? But if you think everything's perfect, then I have to wonder, it's like, all right, what don't you know that you should know that you're missing on the due diligence? So now I've got to do all of the due diligence myself on the property, rather than if you would have just said, hey, here's the problems that I see, here's the risk, here's the hair on the deal, right? And it doesn't mean we won't do the deal. I mean, I've got deals all the time that we look at. In fact, some of the better deals are hairy deals, right? They're deals that have issues. And we sit there and we look at it and we still go forward with it, but at least you know what the issues are. And so when you come to me, the basics that I need the address, what your estimated rehab cost is, what your ARV is. And I like to, rather than just have one number, have safe number, expectation, and then the upside. and just a brief description as to what you're going to do. Is it a add-on? Are we doing an ADU? Are we just a straight remodel? So far as return, I look at it this way. So the way I do the structure of the joint ventures is this: is we take a preferred return for what we would get, whatever we're averaging or whatever the median number is for that month. That's the preferred return. And so like today, it's probably, I don't know, 1.5 points, and call it 9.25% or something like that. And so that's the preferred return. And then anything above that, we split. But I'll put up all of the money. We'll advance the money for repairs. We'll do all that stuff so that you don't need any money whatsoever to do in the deal. And more importantly, unlike, I know there's some hard money lenders that say, yeah, hey, we'll do that up to 75% of the ARV or something like that. Well, the reality is there's not, in this market in California, there's not deals up to 70%. If you're getting a 70% deal where it's all in, that's a grand slam deal, and I'll do it for less than 50-50, right? That's a home run deal, but the reality is here in this market, you're going to be at 85, 87% of the ARV to make some money. And that's where you have to be competitive to do that. So I don't mind doing that. I like those deals. I look for a 10% net to sales profit, means net versus the after repaired value. In fact, Thomas, if you let me share a screen, I'll share a spreadsheet that I've got that kind of will demonstrate that a little bit more. But that's really what I'm looking for, right? So something, and I'll squeeze down in areas like that are bread and butter areas where there's very low inventory. I'll squeeze down to 8%, something like that. But under 8%, it's not really, it stops warranting the extra risk, because I'd rather than just be a lender, at 70% or 75% with no extra work product, no additional risk. And then, and you've got the at-risk capital. So that's kind of the way I look at it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So you got like a safe ARV, but you don't need like home inspection reports or anything like that. You just need like a approximate rehab. What it could potentially be on the high, the bad side, in the middle, which is based on comps.
Right.
And then you have your own way of looking at it and determine if it's a good deal or not. Is it just for single family, or do you look at land deals too now?
The land deals are interesting. So I'll look at the land deals. I'll look at commercial. I mean, I'll look at just about anything if I think it makes sense. I haven't really done anything out of state so far as the joint venture. I've done a few loans, but not anything from the joint venture side. I'm looking at actually a development in New Jersey right now that, and my problem is this, right? I know what my marketplace really well. I don't really know the costs in New Jersey. And so this is usually where, people get hurt. And I'll give you an example. We started doing business in Texas pre Great Recession. We saw the writing in the wall in that we were lending, we were doing these construction loans back then. And there were people that we were turning down at, back then, I think it was at 3 points and, 10%. And they were coming in with 30% down. And we were passing on some of these people because we're like, look, you don't have enough reserves. You have no experience. This is going to fail for you. And then enter IndyMac Bank. And they're like, we'll give you the money for no points and 7%. We're like, oh, this is going to end badly. Right. So all of a sudden we're like, all right, let's start divesting California. And we thought, we agreed with Bruce that the demographics were much better in Texas. So we looked at Texas, St. Louis, Florida. We looked at a few states. And Texas was the one where we opened an office in. And so when we were out there, we started looking at the transaction. I was like, oh, great. Well, I bought a place that was, I bought a personal place there. And it was also Anchor's office on the lower level. So it worked out. It was an old church that I converted into my house. And then we started buying some other things. I bought this condo complex where, I became the de facto, HOA president because we own most of the units in there. Started buying other multifamilies there. And then, the crash happened. And of course we took back some foreclosures just like everyone else. And some of these foreclosures were in great condition. You go back 2 weeks and they've got foundation issues. And I'm like, all right, well, what the hell happened? How, I just walked this property and it was fine. And now it's got, 2 inches off. I mean, significant foundation issues. And we're walking with his broker, and the broker tells me, he's like, well, were you guys watering the foundation? And I'm like, what the heck are you talking about? You water the foundation? I'm like, I'm from California. We water plants. We don't water our foundation. And he's like, oh no, this area is like heavy clay. If you don't keep the foundation like moist, it's going to shift between the heat and like a super
Yep.
day and then a super dry day. And if you have that happen in a week, which is, if you've ever lived in Dallas, the saying is like, oh, if you don't like the weather, just wait 20 minutes. It'll change. And so, of course, we had, I don't know, probably a dozen houses that we didn't know this before. We're like, all right, automatic hoses and get the water going if we need it. But started doing things like that because we didn't know what we didn't know, right? And so, we thought, hey, we're sharp guys. We could figure this out. Yeah, we figured it out, tens of thousands of dollars later. We never let that happen again. But that's what I'm kind of looking for with investors is that, I have a guy that we fund some deals for now, and he's a hustler. He's a young kid, super hungry, and my biggest issue, and I've tried telling them this several times, is that if you have to look at us like a partner, even if you're talking to any hard money lender, from when I was a hard money lender, like the best borrowers that got the most leverage were the ones that were just straight up with me, and even when they were late on their payments, they're like, hey man, I'm tight right now, and I'm gonna have to let this ride until it sells, and we're in escrow already, but it's gonna close in like 3 weeks. Okay, great. Versus the guy who's like, yeah, I'm sending it in. You haven't got that check yet? What are you talking about? The bullshit just got to stop because it's tough. And the problem is when you're really busy, that you can't sit there and deal with all that. And the problem is that if someone's not being straightforward with that, what else aren't they being straightforward, right? So then you have to protect yourself. Or in like that case, if you have investors, you have a fiduciary to your investors to sit there and protect them. Whereas if they're telling you the bad news up front, you can just relay that info to the investors. Because what happens is this is I'll give you an example. Like we had one investor that had pretty close to 80 million with us. And, he didn't really, he was like, look, good, bad, whatever. I just want the info. The problem was when we didn't have the info, he's like, look, we don't know. And we have to act like go under the worst case scenario. So then you start pressing the clients and foreclosing and things along those lines. So, we were fortunate that we didn't have to foreclose on a ton because we were very proactive with our clients, but we built a technology that allowed us to track our clients so that we knew before they knew that they were going to have cash flow problems. And so one of the issues is that, as a lender or even now as an investor, is that, if let's say you came to me with a bunch of deals and your capabilities are not as scalable as you might think they would be, and I start just lending you money, I can actually cause you to fail while you've been doing pretty good because I can inundate you with money, which sounds like it's a great thing. But then all of a sudden your projects, instead of being done in, let's say it's a standard rehab, instead of being done in, 5 weeks or 6 weeks or 2 months or 3 months or whatever the number is, right? That it starts expanding into like, an extra month, an extra 2 months. Well, that hurts everyone's yield. But if I'm just lending you money and you're borrowing money, that's extra payments, that's extra stuff that you've got to cash flow. And those draws, like as a lender, you're generally advancing the money up front and then getting reimbursed. So if you've got too many projects going, now your cash flow is dwindled, that becomes a problem. So that's a better scenario that I implore, if you guys are borrowing money and you get to that point, to just talk to your lender and say, look, here's where I'm at. Can you do something for me? Like, we call it vendor pays or like direct contractor pays to help keep the projects going. Because our yield also, right, is hurt if you're in the deal longer. I mean, sure, we can make late fees, extension fees, things along those lines. But the reality is that, you have to look at your clients like a partner, even if we're just a lender, because at the end of the day, if you don't help them get to the finish line, it's that's your deal to deal with most likely. And so, going back to your original question, if you're presenting deals, the yield for like I'm basically looking for things that we're going to make about 30% on, right? So we got the preferred return, and so if we're in and out in 6 months or less, that's where the 10% net to sales profit comes in, because there's also the preferred return that counts for the balance of it. If it's a year-long project like a development deal or a land deal, then I think that we want to make a little bit more money. One of the risks that most people don't realize with land is that you can make fortunes in land if you time it right. But if you don't time it right, the people that are actually developing that land or that are building on that land, let's say the market changes. As a builder, as a contractor, you're a contractor, right? So it's if your profit margin on that deal isn't going to change. So the thing that absorbs it and also gains the most from it is the value of that land. So when the market's going up, right, and it's taking off and it's going great and it's steady, like incline, when you buy land really cheap, by the time you've entitled it, if you're in LA, that's at least a 2-year process. If you're doing small lot subdivisions, they're 5-year turnarounds. I know everyone's like, oh no, we can do it. I've been a part of them. That's just how long they take. And I've been a part of them with some very sophisticated operators that have great staff, are on top of everything. And that's just how long it takes. And so, if you're timing it wrong, and like right now where we've had a lot of appreciation, there's more risk in the land deals. If you're looking at the residential type land deals, and I'm looking at with that said, I get pitched, like someone just pitched me a 8 or 10 lot deal somewhere. It sounds great. In fact, it's being wholesaled out right now by one of the larger groups. Sounds great until you look at it and it's hillside and okay, great. You got the track map approved. What about the soils report? I mean, that's another year to get that approved and the foundation approved before you can even start building. So the city of LA is super slow. So it's, you look at the timelines, and that's really what we're basing the returns on, is that expectation as to how long it's actually going to take. My favorite land deals are the people that come in. It's like, oh yeah, look, we're buying these. If we divide it, it's going to be this much for each lot. It's a home run. I'm like, all right, what about the entitlements? What about, how far is the sewer? How far is the water? How far, and they're like, well, I don't know. Okay, I don't know is like it's a quick pass because I don't have the time to figure all that out. And we can bring someone in if we think the numbers are really great. But just like anything else, you really want to buy equity, right? You don't want to buy, it's much tougher to buy the architect or the engineer that bought a plot of land and then subdivided it, and now he's trying to retail that portion out because it's already approved. They're sucking out a lot of the profit from that. And I'm not saying that you can never do that, but if you've got efficiencies on construction, which I think, because you're a licensed contractor, you may have better efficiencies than other people, and that might be what you bring to the table, right? And so, but the problem is that, if I couldn't, and I used to be a licensed contractor too, but it's I let my license just expire because I wasn't doing any deals for anybody, any third parties. But when you sit there and you look at the transactions, I have to be able to replicate the numbers. And so, and the other thing is that even if you could build it at, let's say you could build at $90 a square foot, and normally you would charge clients $130 or $150 a square foot. We should do our numbers on that $150 a square foot and see if it's at least still a profitable deal somewhat. If it's not a profitable deal, then I think you have to look twice at doing that deal, because, rather than be in this deal that you have an at-risk element, you can just go and build for somebody else and make that same amount of money with no risk. And so, I want to look at deals for what the actual investment is, instead of what the basically what the perceived investment is. I do get deals pitched sometimes where people say, hey, it's and Thomas, if you let me share a screen, I'll share with you my a workup on one particular deal. And one of the things is that I love getting calls where it's like, oh yeah, it's going to be 40,000 in rehab.
Hey, Robert.
Yep.
You co-host so you can share your screen.
Okay. All right. Let me see here. All right. I'll pick this one here. All right, let me move this over so I can see it a little bit easier. All right, so this is, so I'll just go here. So this is actually an apartment building that, and I mentioned like we're about to start this building. And you know, they had,
We can't see
See
anything.
the line
you can't see anything?
No.
at first, but then you tap
He's another
something.
screen.
All right, let me go back here. How about now? All right, let me reshare this. It's too bad, it was good stuff. How about now?
There it is.
All right. So this is kind of a workup that we do. And if you partner with us, you'll get the same thing. We go through, and part of what we do is we just go through and let me see if I can expand this so you can see a little bit more of it. The numbers aren't as important. I'll just, all right, there you go. And so part of what we do is we just kind of go line by line with whatever we're going to need. You know, some of it is detailed and some of this is, you know, just, it's just used as a placeholder for an approximate amount of what we think we might need. You know, but we go through and essentially just try to parse it out. And then we also have a labor rate. And on some of these, this one has, yeah, on some of these we'll have all the labor built into it. And then we send it out. When we send it out to the contractors, we delete this portion. So we've got our internal costs as to what we think it's going to cost. And how long everything is going to take to install. Some of the things we're overestimating, which is okay, because we're also underestimating on some other things, or we're missing some things. But the point is that, like, we just go, you know, like in a kitchen, what do we need? You know, here's what we're doing. This is an apartment building, so it's really a light rehab. We're not replacing cabinets, but there's just some functionality that we've got to change to update the units so that they can rent for more. I'm big on kind of landscaping and doing different things. And so this is kind of, when you go through it, you know, it's just a breakdown. And at the very end, it just kind of gives us a total. So when people tell me, hey, it's going to be, you know, 40,000 to do all this stuff, I'm like, all right, great. Let's just look at the parts, right? And the parts alone are, in this case, $29,000 almost, right? And so if we're looking at that, I mean, you're not going to get that labor done for $10,000. It's unrealistic. And so once people start seeing everything as it's added up, then I think they start to see what the actual numbers are. So I just want to be as accurate as we can up front versus I'll stop sharing that, versus basically, you know, going into it with rosy glasses where we sit there and say, hey, here's, you know, okay, we're going to spend 45. If it's 45, great. If it's 80, it's 80. Whatever it is, we should just know that up front so we know what the investment is. And that's not to say that sometimes we say, okay, let's back off things. And, you know, let me see if I've got a different one. Like I have one where we do, like we've got a light version, we've got a full remodel, a light remodel. And let me see, I'm looking at one. You know what, I think I know one that we did here. So this is let me see if this is the right one.
So I imagine you need like a detailed architect plans to create a spreadsheet like that. Yeah.
No, I mean, this is actually here, I'll share the screen here. Let's see, where is that? Why is that not showing? That's weird. Let's cancel that one. All right, so you guys see that screen?
Yes.
Okay, so this particular one, you know, the original estimate, and this is a 4,700 square foot house. It's kind of not in that bad of shape. But if you look at, like, my original number was 388,000. You know, originally when they brought me this deal, they said, hey, it's going to be like 100, 150,000. And then the light version which is we're not changing cabinets. We're still doing some stuff, fixing all the termite damage and dry rot on the decks, things on painting the inside and outside. But that got it down to 225. And that's not really any massive remodel. Like if you look through what we're doing, there's some landscaping, it's really some lighting. This is each room, right? So I mean, we're adding 4 recessed lights here and a ceiling fan to the master. In the kitchen, all we're doing is replacing some bulbs. We're changing out some pendants, adding new hardware, going to have the cabinets painted, and then we're replacing the appliances. I don't even have, in this one here, the countertops were okay. I'm not even changing the countertops. We're still at $225,000. And I think we can get that down a little bit, but how much are we going to get it down really? And so I guess my point is that, sometimes 100,000 or whatever that number is, it sounds like a real number, right? But you have to be cognizant of the size. I mean, this is basically 3 houses. So if you're spending, 50 or 60 on a house, there's your 180. I mean, you get a little bit of economy of scale, but there's also issues with the house that we can't ignore. It's got cracks all over the foundation. It's on a hillside, and we already had that checked out. It's not the hillside issue. It's just that they didn't really rebar the driveway correctly. And so it's all cracked up. And so, what doesn't your buyer want on a hillside property? To see cracks, all over the place, right? That's a little scary. So that's, 30 grand just for the driveway, because it's a big driveway. And so, we sit there, we start looking at all this stuff, and it just starts to add up little by little and little by little. And every time it adds up, it's like, okay, if we don't, like this property, we're likely going to end up passing on it. It's $1,650,000 buy. In fact, you know what? Here, I'll pull up this other spreadsheet. I think I have this on here.
While you're doing that, when you're done, Sharon has a question for you.
Sure. So let's see. I think I can share this screen here. All right, can you guys see this? So this is kind of a numbers matrix that I basically, if you call me with a deal, this is what I'm putting it into. And then I'm looking at, okay, if we're just acting as a cash partner, or there's an agent involved, or it's just my buy, or we're acting as a gap lender because maybe they've already got a subject to deal or something along those lines of deal. And so, but essentially, this is just kind of the overview, and I'll just tell you what it's based off of. This is essentially a HUD-1 on the purchase, and then there's a HUD-1 on the resale, and we just add in the payments. But this is all tied, like these are all formulas, so it is basically whatever the actual transfer taxes are for the city of LA, whatever the the property taxes might be. The only thing it doesn't have is the supplemental taxes, which we have to input manually. But to give you an idea of like that particular deal, it was brought to me at $1,650,000. The house next door sold for it sold for 2.1. It's relatively the same house. I think it has a slightly better layout, but ours, we were originally thinking, okay, we're going to do more to it. And so we were thinking it was a value at 2.2. Well, when we were doing more to it, we were at 350,000 in the remodeling cost. And so all of a sudden, okay, if you look here, now we're not making any money, right? And so this is I think our average, I think this is actually slightly higher right now, but if we're breaking even, and I think we're estimating 5 months for that, there's no money in the deal, right? And so what do we have to get? So now we went back and said, all right, well, what if we spend the 225? Then what is it going to sell for? Okay, maybe it's $1,950,000, right? And so what do we have? And then we're in and out, let's say in 4 months. That's worse. So really we need to be down at $1,400,000. And the problem is that, okay, so that's only I told you guys, I said, I'm looking really for about a 10% net to sales profit. This is a 7, almost 8% deal. If we got it down to $1,400,000, I'd probably gamble and just go for it. And so that's kind of what I'm looking for in the deal is if you called me, that's why I said I need the purchase price, your estimated rehab, your ARV. I'm going to input both the I'm going to input the expectation here, right? And then I'll look at the safe number. And if we're still at least slightly better than breaking even on the safe number, we'd probably gamble a little bit and go with in this particular market, you know? And so these are kind of the numbers that I look for, and we try to assess risk for every type of situation. You know, I've got a lot of experience. We've done lot subdivisions, small lot, you know, build outs, yeah, done a few ADUs, not a ton. I'm not a huge ADU fan, only in that the appraisals kill you. And right now the market's so hot that unless you're doing ADUs where you have a lot of ADU comps, you know, it's not my recommendation to do. So Sharon, I think you had a question.
Yeah, back your spreadsheet that showed the parts. I kind of noticed that a lot of the parts were coming like on Amazon, but I hadn't seen a detail where it's like if I go through with a contractor or my rehabber and say I'm going to need 10 recessed lightings or whatever, that to have those priced out. Do you provide those because you kind of know what's going in there? Do you order those or you leave them to your contractor and those are just?
So the way I do the bids for the, in here, let me pull that back up. Let's see, where is that?
It was suggested that we provide the parts and just pay contractor for labor, but I was wondering how you did it.
Yeah, so I recommend that. I like that. I think it's easier to track everything. I think especially when you're flipping homes, the important thing is that you're trying to get the finish that you need to be able to attain the ARV that you're looking to get.
Right.
And if you leave it up to the contractor and it's not detailed out, you know, it leaves the opportunity for them to buy lesser quality things that then don't get you to that finish line that you're looking to get to. And so the other thing is that if I can pull that back up, let's see which one was that.
So if you're looking, I know you like the higher end. So if you had like the $700,000 house versus the 2.5, you would actually go in and adjust those parts. If you were going to lend money or joint venture.
Yeah. So if you got the, let's see here. So I'll share this again, just to give you an example. One of the things that I like about doing it this way, and if you ever, like if we ever do a deal together, you'll see one of the things is like, let's say this is the interior work here for the units.
Right.
And one of the things that it does is it starts going room by room. So this is the living room, right? And it tells them like, hey, we want to add some trim here. We're going to add a chandelier here. And this is the chandelier we're going to add. And so if they need the specs of the chandelier, they can just click on that and it'll pop open the what in this case it's Amazon, but
right.
And I by the way, Amazon's not the cheapest, it's just the easiest. And so, you know, you know, what it helps is that they have the spec sheets available that are pretty easy. And also it tells them like, okay, in this room, here's something that we're going to do. Here's the chandelier and the bulbs that are going to go there. This is, you know, you might need some wire, a chandelier box, a switch. Here's a wall sconce that we might need that was, you know, in this particular living room, it had not in that picture. Here's the kitchen and what we're doing to it, right? We're going to paint, we're changing out the existing light for a track light. And, you know, I think here's the track light, you know, those are the appliances. We're adding these pendants and here are the pendants that we're adding, you know, and, you know, in this case here, it already had recessed lights. So we're just doing a recessed light to pendant exchange because it's an apartment building. So you're trying to save as much cost as you can. And so essentially we just go through and this becomes the go by for the contractor. Now the benefit of doing it this way, this is a lot more work, but also if they're asking you for a draw, it's very easy because we've already assessed, okay, it's going to be $90 for this. It's going to be 45 for this. You want to draw, we can just go off and check the stuff that's done. And then there's your money. If you're asking me for an extra $8,000, like, sorry, man, you just got to do more work. It's very simple. And so they buy into this. And so they know exactly what needs to get done, you know, and you know, then listen, there's some times where we advance a little bit more because, you know, there's a reasonable reason for it. But, you know, other times there's just no reason and they're front loading, which is, you know, in contractor terms, what they're basically doing is a lot of times is they pull most of their profit out up front. And then your project slows down towards the end because they have no more money in the deal, right? And so you want to basically be at par. They can be slightly ahead, or if you're slightly ahead is ideal, especially when you're labor only. But if you are slightly ahead, make sure the money's available for them to pay their guys. The last, their guys are, basically living mostly paycheck to paycheck.
Right.
Don't short those guys. Like those guys need
Right.
their money. Make sure they get paid. If they're short and short on some things, it's okay to sit there and say, hey, listen, you guys got to catch up and hustle up. A lot of the mistakes that I see with contractors when I'm walking through, it's stuff that I point out, they ignore it because they don't want to deal with it. And then it comes back to bite them in the ass later on. I'll give you an example of one thing that just is getting redone today. We have a house that was not done, right? It's an old house, 1903 construction, and the house itself has just walls that aren't square. And so what that means is that, if like in this case, we're installing tile, like a tile shower.
Right.
And, I'm telling them, I'm like, look, get your big square, make sure you float this so that it's square, because otherwise it's going to be really noticeable when you put the tile. Of course, they don't listen. And, he installed it, and I'm like, why is your grout line so much bigger there where it needs to be here? And, then all of a sudden everything laid out wrong. He's like, yeah, we didn't square it. And I'm like, you got to redo it. It's like, what do you want me to do? We can't sell it like this. And usually, like, listen, there's things where we'll let stuff ride. Like if I don't think it's going to affect the sales price of the home, like, let's roll, let's move on. Don't do it again. This one, it was really, I have the picture, but it was so bad. I said, look, I'm going to take a picture of it. If it looks good in the picture, we'll go with it. And if it becomes an issue, then you'll have to come back and redo it. Right.
Right.
And I took the picture and I looked at it. I'm like, there's no way we can put this on the MLS. I said, look at it. He looked at it and he's like, yeah, we got to redo it.
Okay.
And it was all basically because they just didn't follow the steps, right? There's steps to do in construction. And I think that's one of the things that'll help me. I walked through a project for somebody else and they said, hey, I'm having some issues. Can you walk it through? And I said, sure. I walked through the property. It's not on the market yet, but they're quote unquote finished, right? And so I walked through this place and I'm like, all right. I'm like, what? It looks pretty decent. I said, but you want to see all of the things that I see? Some of the things your buyers are going to see and some of them they won't. And I said, so here you've got this, it's probably an 1,100 square foot, 3-bedroom, 1-bath house. And I said, okay, let's walk through. We're walking through. And I didn't really notice it initially. I'm like, okay, they're missing some trim for the flooring. I said, the tile, they did a really crappy job. They just literally put it over drywall. They didn't, they added a tub and shower. I'm like, look, your window's halfway into the shower. It's going to leak water. You can't even put a surround here. It's just some technical things that they should have caught. And they didn't. They just went through. I said, and the other thing is that your guy, there's no backer here. And so the tile's not even straight. Whenever you're tiling, or my favorite is when, beginners want to install the cabinets themselves and they don't level them. And I don't really realize that they're not level until they start putting a subway tile backsplash. And then it's kind of at an angle, right? And it's like, why is that happening? It's like, well, right? It's like the foundation.
Oh, man.
Right? Arthur got to do that, right? So level lines, plumb lines. Like in this house, I said, listen, trust nothing else, because the guy on one of the doors, he could hide a lot in doors because of the trim. But there was an opening that wasn't going to be cased. It was just drywalled. And I'm like, you're off about 2 inches there. He's like, no way, I measured. And I'm like, I'll bet you $100 you're off 2 inches there. And he's like, well, no. He goes, look, I'm going to measure. He measures from the ceiling. And of course, the ceiling measurement's right. I'm like, now measure from the floor. He's like, oh, well, the floor's crooked. I'm like, everything's crooked in this house. It's an old house, right? I said, don't trust anything except for like a self-leveling laser plumb line or your square. I go, those are the two things you can trust. That's it. Everything else, something's going to be off. And so, of course, they had to redo it. But it's simple things like that. The problem is, when you're at the rough stage, it's an easy part to fix. The problem is when you're done and then you're putting, these very straight lines like baseboards or tile,
Right.
it is gonna, well, if you didn't do it right up front, it's gonna really be glaring there.
What?
And
Don't
so,
do the rest.
yeah, so anyhow, so for me, this sheet that I was showing you, right? It solves a lot of conflicts with the contractor. And there's time, here, I'll give you an example. We did a sheet, we have a house we're about to start, and the contractor came back and he's like, 40,000 for labor. My sheet he was at 104 for labor. So like 5,600 square foot house we're about to start. And I'm like, 40,000, huh? And I'm like, man, you're not even just off. And he's like, well, here, I tell him he's off, right? And he tells me, he's like, well, it's more because there's always stuff that comes up. And I'm like, bro, it's not more, it's way less. You should be easily twice that, and at twice that, I feel like I'm getting the better of them, right? Because my internal number is almost 3 times that. The problem is when you get to these properties that are larger, like the apartment buildings or the houses, that's, he's looking at it like, okay, well, we're going to paint the outside. All right. You think you're going to get done with this really quick, like you would a normal 1,500 square foot house?
Hey,
No,
Robert,
yeah.
Vincent has a question.
All right, go ahead.
Thank you, Robert.
You got
Oh,
it.
hi, Robert. So I have I created a similar spreadsheet to yours, so that feels good to me. My wife and I, it's our first duplex, 2 houses on a lot. And how do you calculate your numbers on a buy and hold? Because I know you have a 5-year plan, but so right now, and how do you calculate how much to put into it when you're looking to buy and hold? Because as we're fixing it up, we're just like noticing one thing after another. And to us, everything feels urgent. And I was wondering, as a more experienced person, how do you know when to stop, or when to let some things ride? Because right now, I feel like I just don't know what I need to do now or what can happen later. Everything feels important. So how do you prioritize a buy and hold in a rehab situation like this?
So for the rehabs, it's very different when you're buying and holding it versus when you're going to flip it. But one of the things that you need to be cognizant of is when you start remodeling anything, whatever you don't do is going to look old next to something that's brand new. And so don't fall into the trap, especially on the buy and holds. Don't fall into the trap of like everything has to be perfect, because on a buy and hold, what you're really looking for is what that investment adds to the value of the property and also to the rents and the bottom line, right? And so if you start going through, so what I do is I have this kind of rent rolls, and this is the way we analyze this. This is a 12-unit property that we're getting ready to start. And so this is the current rent on it, right? And so right now, and it's got 3 vacant units, so it's actually, like more like, no, actually, I'm gonna leave that 1450 one. So I'll change these 3, right? So if they rented in their as-is condition, we think they'd rent for about 1250. So this has a basis of 2.1 million, and we did that because basically once you've got, let's say, that income that is added in, right now it's 2.2 is what it comes at, but it needs probably 150,000 in work. And so we felt that would discount off of at least somewhat off the value. So we took 100, figured we'd meet in the middle, and we assessed it with a 32% expense ratio, which the building's actually much less. And if have a duplex and you're going to self-manage, it's going to be a lot less. You have to, the duplexes aren't as important, but when you get into the like more multifamilies where you have investor, non-owner occupied type buyers, they're a lot of times not going to self-manage. And so they're going to sub that out. And so while their inspections are lower or their expenses are lower, their actual expenses are lower, you have to account for that. Your new buyer is going to have a stepped up, property tax basis, right? And so their property tax is going to be higher, as well as they may hire a property management company, and that's going to charge them another, 5-7%, depending on, who they go to. So we account for that so we can assess the value. So to answer your question, let's say you're considering putting, I don't know, let's just say $50 into a property, right? An extra $50 item or $100, which doesn't sound like a lot, right? What we look at is, okay, how much extra income is that going to bring into the unit, right? So is that going to bring in, and for example, one of the things that we're doing, one of the kind of obsolescence that these units had is that you've got 12 units and you've got one washer and dryer that they share. And so we toyed around with, okay, let's add, like my preference would be to add the washer and dryer inside the unit versus, more units inside the common washer dryer room. We opted to go into the washer dryer room here, which on personal buildings, I tend to kind of rip out unless that's the only alternative. And one of the reasons is that you sometimes, like I usually give them for free and just charge for more for rent. And I like having that rent versus collecting the coins and having to do the maintenance from that side, or having a contract where you get less. In this particular case, this is actually a joint venture with a owner on this building. So we're not actually buying it. We're just repositioning and doing the remodel for them. And to give you an idea, is if you're contemplating the repairs, you have to look at the comparables, right? So the area rent comparables, and just see what they're actually renting for. And so in this case here, this was kind of an updated unit. It had a balcony, it had new kitchen cabinets, and that was getting $1,650 for a 1-1, right? And so similar in size to ours. It was slightly bigger, but we said, okay, that's okay. They're a lot stricter on their credit profile than we could be. This is another property that, that was renting out at $1,850, right? It's a 2-1, but it's dated, and one of our 2-1s is already getting $2,100. So we just kind of went through and looked at the comparables for the actual units, and then we looked at what they were actually selling for on a cap rate perspective for what people were paying. So then when we're assessing the repairs, we go back and we say, okay, let's say you're contemplating putting new flooring, right? Is that new flooring going to bring you an extra $50 a month, right? And so if the answer is yes, what does $50 a month do? So let's just say we had $50 a month here. So $50 a month, and your flooring there might cost you $2,000. Okay, on a cap rate at a 5.5 cap, that adds about $11,000 in value. So we would probably do that addition, right? Because what we're looking for is, even if we're buying and holding it, we're looking for how much extra value we're creating through the income that is going to be generated from those repairs. If nobody's going to care that you have, dimmers versus switches, and it's not going to affect your value, then you likely wouldn't change that out. And so just look at, it's not necessarily the cost of the repairs, it's the cost of the repairs and how much more income that brings in monthly, right? If it brings in, because look, so if you look at this building here, right, we're going to increase the income by they haven't raised the rents in years. So if we just go the allowed increase plus inflation, so if we're at 107%, or I think is what it is for this particular city, and we raise it up to 17,200, we just raised the value to 2.5. So we're spending 150, and we raise the basis from 2.1 to 2.55 at the same cap rate with the same expenses, right? So we didn't really change anything, but we picked up essentially 450,000 in value by putting out 150. We're going to do that all day long. And so if you're looking to buy and hold and you're going to refinance, they're going to look at your income, and that's significant. So don't do the repairs that really are going to add no value, that are aesthetic. Like the aesthetic things that we're doing to this particular building, this is here. I'll give you some before and afters. This is another building that we did. We add like some common area things. This is kind of before, right? There was no patios here. We like to add common areas because we found that people that are willing to pay the higher rents, they want some common space, and so we just look at, okay, what did this cost us? We basically built a deck over an existing planter, right? Got rid of these plants and just opened it all up. This is, from a cost perspective, this patio is really, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 4x4s, right? And then a sail shade on top, some pipe and drape, and then the furniture, and that kind of created an upside of value. So these units went from 1,100 to, like, I think we were at 18 something, for these units, and so we looked at what we ended up doing to the outs. Yeah, we added the Soltio tile, we added the colors, and that's some of the design aspect. But we felt that tenant, when we compared it to other buildings, that's what they were looking for, was this common aspect that they could use in this particular type of set. In this case, this was a fourplex back here, and there was a house in front. And so when we look at what we're going to do from a design perspective, we sit there and say, okay, how can we get not just the existing tenants to be okay? Like in this one here, they've got 3 vacancies and 9 are occupied. So we don't want those 9 occupied tenants to move out because it's costing us roughly 10,000 each unit to remodel. And so if we can keep those units, even though they're paying a little bit low, even, you know, and not have to spend that 10, and we're happy with the returns we're making, it's great. And so that's the goal. But, you know, the reality is, if let's say they did move out, so the remodeled market rents is here, you know, we may take our value at a full value up to almost 3.1. But, you know, you're going to have a lot longer. And with this particular owner, they didn't necessarily want to do that route because they didn't want to wait. You know, as it's COVID times, it's going to take longer to evict. So they're willing to leave more money on the table. They're happy with, hey, we put out 150, we get, you know, a 450 return, and then we're in this case we're participating in that with them. And so, you know, that's I think what you have to look for in the repairs that you're going to do is really pay attention. Act like a tenant, and you're looking at your comparable rentals, and how does your property compare? Can you get more? And what you're doing to it, you know, don't go down the rabbit hole of just always making it the best. It doesn't have to be the best. You know, you got to do certain things that if they're going to save you money on the maintenance, that means something, right? If it's going to bring you more dollars, then that amount of rent extra, if it's $5, $10, whatever it is worth it, then you do that. And like that. Sorry, go ahead.
Can I stop you for a second?
Sure.
Now, for those that are listening to what he's saying, do you actually physically understand his sheet and what he's actually saying? So if you have any questions, please ask him. This is what he's here for.
Yeah. So if you're looking at, just to reiterate, this right now just shows the current rate. This is the value of each unit based on its current income at this cap rate. So if we change this to, let's say, a 5 cap, because that was, let's say, what the area would do, then our value would drop. Alternatively, so when you're talking about cap rates, the lower the cap rate, the higher the price, which means that the investors are expecting a lower return, right? So in this area, we figured that the median for stabilized buildings was about 5.5. And 5 was kind of the safe number. So going back to valuations, 5 was the safe number, right? 5.5 was our expectation. And then we had like 5.7 was the downside number, right? And so, or maybe I said that backwards. So 5 was the upside, 5.5. So the way cap rates work is the lower the cap rate, the higher the sales price, because that's a return that you're expecting your buyer to accept, right? That percentage return on their investment. And so in this case here, you know, there was a comp. One of the comps is at a 4.35. And so, you know, if we looked at that, we could say, wow, this building's worth 2.8. But the reality is that 4.3 sold because it was a, you know, and going back and being, again, realistic to it, that 4.8 was a much larger lot. It was actually 2 parcels that they sold as one big complex. And the buyer they got actually a pretty good deal because they could have actually sold that off as a 6 unit and another 7 unit and made more money, just not touching it, but just selling them off separately because they were 2 separate parcels already. So, you know, if it's an unsophisticated buyer that's looking at it, they're going to miss that. And they're like, oh, wow, this is a 4 point something deal. And we can sit there and flip this for 4 point something because this is the comp that's right down the block. And they don't pay attention to the details. And all of a sudden you get stuck and you're banking on a 2.8, or worse yet, you pay 2.4 because you think you can sell it for 2.8. And really you were supposed to pay 2.1 is the right number because it's going to sell for this number. Right. And so as long as you understand what the marketplace is that you're working with, that's okay. But going back to what Thomas was mentioning, whatever repairs on multifamily that you're doing, you want to make sure that it's going to have a positive effect on your monthly income. And so in this case here, this column is what my current rents are. And I'm just picking on, I mean, I did the same thing over here, but I'm just picking on whatever that increased value is to demonstrate how that reflects and what that additional value add based on the cap rate that a buyer is going to buy. So same building, different income, right? Once we reposition it, they'll pay more and still have the same return. And so that's kind of what we were looking at. So in like Vincent's case, if he's doing remodeling and he's like, okay, I'm going to add new flooring, I think that a buyer's probably going to pay an extra, $100 a month for that extra flooring, and that flooring is going to cost him, let's say, $3,000 or $4,000. He's adding $21,000 or $22,000 in value at a 5.5 cap. So if he's going to keep that building and then refinance, this helps him. That's worth it, right? Now, if he thinks he would have got that $100 anyhow, right, then his net gain is zero. You wouldn't spend the money. You would do something different with that. And so that's I guess the point from a multifamily standpoint that you're trying to basically ascertain, so that you can sit there and say, okay, is this a reasonable investment, right? So everything on the multifamily side that you want to look at is, what is the return that this is making, and make those decisions. And then, listen, you can have some emotional stuff, like you want to do certain things because there's pride of ownership and what have not. That's okay too. But I mean, just be cognizant that that's the difference and that's what you're doing, and then you can make that decision, right? So I hope that answered your question.
That is so helpful. Thank you so much. Like, just that really just gives you that gives me a really nice compass to kind of realign. So thank you for that.
Good. You're welcome.
Hey,
I have a
Robert,
question.
go ahead. Go ahead.
So, how do you also include in your numbers if a tenant does not pay for several months? I mean, is that part of your calculation too? Do you put an allowance to that?
Well, yeah. So generally speaking, when you're doing, you're looking at the area, essentially vacancy rates, right? And, I don't account for anything higher than the area vacancy rate. You're going to naturally have tenants sometimes that don't pay, and you try to work with them to get them out. Or if you have to go through the eviction, that's kind of a loss. But you can't be so conservative that you don't do deals, right? And if you're buying a property where, I'm going to pick on Vincent for a second here, but if you're buying a duplex to buy and hold, your risk is that you could lose 50% of your income. So you have to be prepared to be able to handle that. On a 12 unit building like this one here, if you lose one of the units and they've got issues, okay, you're going to lose, anywhere between 1,200 and, let's say, $2,000 worth of income. It's not going to kill the deal if you still got, if you bought right. The other thing is that, if you're buying and holding, is what are you refinancing at? Are you refinancing at a 2.75 10-year interest only, type loan, or are you going into a, 3% or 3.5%, fully amortized loan? Or are you doing, like, you're using kind of what I call the BC paper, which is, they're at 5 or 6%. And, and so that's sucking up a lot of your value. So I think you just have to look at and see what your, basically what your net liability is if you have tenants that don't pay. There's a lot of people that like Section 8. I have clients that have mostly Section 8 buildings. Section 8 is not my favorite because, you've seen time and time again, there's budget cuts, there's budget shortfalls, there's stalemates at the budgets. And guess what? When there's a stalemate in your city and you're waiting for that check and you're relying on that check, it could go months where that voucher is not, you can't cash it, and you're waiting for that payment to come through. So if you don't have those type of reserves, you're gonna get yourself into some trouble. Listen, but reserves, here's the good thing, right? Is money solves a lot of this. So if you've got money that you're making from other venues or other, aspects of the business, that's great. When you're buying and holding, I'm a big proponent that you should have multiple streams of income, right? Because if you just have the one, and this is the mistake I did when I was young and we were doing the apartment buildings, is that was our main stream of income. And we're like, okay, great. We bought all of these doors. We did fantastic on them. They were performing. We managed them well, but we were making very little money, right? And so we started wholesaling. We're like, we're making this much more money wholesaling. And back then we didn't really know it was wholesaling because they didn't call it that, and then we started fixing and flipping, and we're like, wow, that's a good hit. And we were basically And now that I look back at it, we were really flipping apartment buildings when we were stabilizing them. There was a time where there was a 15% vacancy ratio. Today it's probably 2%. You know, there's a waiting list for most apartment buildings right now. You know, if you look at rentals, it's a very, very tight market. You know, and there's other ways to get your rent up, right? It's like for Vincent, if you're looking to rent those out, you know, you have to look at your competition. And if your competition is all kind of mom and pop buildings like that, it's great. If you're competing against the bigger buildings, right? The bigger buildings, in many cases, yes, they have more amenities, but they're also really strict on credit and debt to rent kind of ratios and so forth. Whereas you can be more flexible on that, still get good tenants. You know, one of the things that I used to do when we called this, I read a book called Guerrilla Marketing. I'm sure many of you guys have heard of it. But when I was young, I don't know, 23, and we were buying these apartment buildings. And, you know, and back then when you had a 15% vacancy ratio, I mean, it was really difficult to get tenants, and worse, it was really almost impossible to get good paying tenants that would stay long term, because all of your competition was offering first month free, last month free, sign a year lease, and you had what we called jumpers. And the jumpers would just move from free unit to free unit because everyone was letting them get in with no deposit. And, you know, and so we finally started doing is we said, okay, look, this is ridiculous. We like had a bunch of tenants and then they stopped paying. We're like, shit, we got a bunch of jumpers. So how do we eliminate that? And at the time I was reading that book, and it just gave me the idea of, and it wasn't an idea that was in the book. It just got kind of your juices going a little bit. And I decided to hire some guys to just go door knock on all of the other buildings. And this was during Christmas time. So we had he would carry with him a red flyer and a green flyer. And the jumpers all looked the same, right? Because they had very little furniture, lawn chair, TV, cooler, and really no other furniture, because they're just jumping from place to place. And whereas the tenants that had lived there for a long time, full house full of furniture, it's kind of a mess. And we were basically trying to steal other buildings tenants that had been there for a long time. And so we said, look, the people that are jumpers, give them the red flyer, ask them to apply. The people that are not jumpers, that look like they've been there, if they've been there for more than 5 years, give them a green flyer. And that's our tenant. That's who we want. So what we did is we stabilized a lot of these buildings, and the brokers that we went through, we told them exactly what we were doing. And in a time where, you know, they have clients that were trying to 1030 when it's changed, they paid us a lower cap rate because they understood that our tenants were likely to stay there longer because of our technique for getting them. And so that made us more money. And so if what happens is, like, someone with a red flyer called, we're like, hey, great, you're welcome to apply. It was, you know, we had an application fee, we needed this credit. If someone was with a green flyer and they like them, we're like, hey, you know what? He spoke really highly of you. We're great. We're ready to go. We can waive a lot of stuff for you because you've been in your existing apartment for already 5 years, and we can show that history. And so that meant extra value for us, but also it meant less turnover. And those tenants were the tenants that were, like, you know, the best tenants, you know, and you know, it's ironic. We bought some buildings, you know, so we were primarily doing Long Beach originally, and then we started buying buildings in South Central. And, you know, I thought the buildings in Long Beach were pretty good. And we bought I'm going to call it a gang infested building initially. And, you know, I grew up in Hollywood and hung out in East LA, and we used to hang out in South Central. So it was nothing new to me. And I remember this particular building when we bought it, I'm like, man, so it was the 23rd of December, and we had just closed on it, like, I'm going to say right after Thanksgiving. And then it's got a central water heater that went out. It's a 16-unit apartment building. And I thought, crap, started calling around for plumbers, and everybody wanted, you know, it's the day before Christmas Eve, and nobody wants to go out. And I'm like, shit, man, we can't, like, we can't ignore this. It needs to get done. And so my father-in-law was in town. We went, rented a pickup truck, had, you know, this is inexperience again. They loaded up this water heater that services 16 units, and Arthur will probably appreciate this, right? Overloaded the shocks. This thing was like a low rider on this pickup. And they forklifted it on, and the guy's like, man, your tires are going to pop. I'm like, I don't have a choice. This is it, right? So we drove very slowly to this building, and we get there. And between my father-in-law, my partner on that building, and myself, proceeded to try to move this this water heater, and couldn't even budget. And we're like, shit. All right, what are we gonna do? So we sat there. We went to the building manager. He's like, he goes, I'm shocked you guys are here. We thought we were gonna have what we were saying. It's gonna be a cold Christmas. This is gonna be a cold Christmas, right? And this guy was a really like, he was the property manager, but he was also like, I'm gonna say kind of, he wasn't the actual shot caller, but he was, you know, higher up in the echelon of the gang that had mostly occupied this building. And so we show up and they're looking at us like, what the hell are you guys doing here? We're like, you guys need hot water. And they're like, man, we've gone through several owners on this building and everyone said they're going to do a bunch of stuff. And you guys are the only ones who do this. And the fact that you guys are here, I'll tell you, it was my best performing building. These guys never paid like this. The guys were like, we're paying our rent before our telephone bill and all this stuff. And it's like, all right. And those guys were like awesome. And so I guess my point is you got to have enough reserves to handle like the stuff that comes up. Right. And if you have vacancies, you're going to have to handle those, but you have to have a connection with your tenants as well, you know, to be able to sit there and so that they can make you a priority so that you're not the enemy. Now, I tell my staff that when we're involved in these transactions, you know, everybody's our enemy. You know, we're really the ones who are taking the risk. And you should look at this as your investments too, is that the contractor's the enemy, your agent who's selling you the property is the enemy, the wholesaler is 100% your enemy, right? You know, and not that, you know, they're not great wholesale. I'm just saying that you can't rely on all of the information because everyone's making money off of you, whether or not you make money at the end. And, you know, you're going to find your team members that are on your side, you know, but you're going to build those relationships too. And so as you're building those relationships, that's really a very key part to the business is having those relationships. You know, I remember buying a property that I didn't get inside. It was supposed to be a 3-bedroom, 1-bath. And I walked in and it's a 2-bedroom. I'm like, shit, we're screwed here. And I told my guy, I'm like, look, we have to reorganize this floor plan in order to make it so that we've got a 3-bedroom. He's like, yeah, no problem. I said, here's the deal. I said, I have a $30,000 budget to do everything. And he's like, oh, that's a different question, right? And so, and I said, look, I said, I need to, like, what can you do to help me out? And so he went back to his guys and he said, look, we'll get this done for 30 grand. He goes, but you got to give us another job. And this one's going to probably take an extra like 4 weeks. And I'm like, all right, done. And so, cause the 4 weeks was going to cost me a couple thousand in debt service versus, you know, what it would actually cost. So they ran 2 jobs concurrently. And the reason he did that is because there's other times where, you know, I got way more on houses than I anticipated. And I just gave him a bonus. I'm like, hey, thanks. You know, the house came out great. Here's an unsolicited bonus that they weren't expecting. And, you know, and you build relationships that way, you know? And so I think that once you see that people are on your side and they're team members, you know, and this goes back to what I said early on, which is when you're trying to build a relationship with a lender or an investor like myself, where we're partnering, is that, you know, all of this stuff comes in. I mean, times are great right now for flipping if you're selling, right? It's very difficult to find houses, but that'll balance out later on. And even whether you're borrowing money from, you know, us or another lender, is you want that relationship to basically stand not just the good times, but also, you know, to be there during the rough times as well. You know, it's as a lender, I can tell you, you don't really want to lose a client if you can help them through the issues, because if you have to foreclose, you've lost all his future business, right? And likely he's just going to go to another lender and do more business with someone. So if you can work through with them and you can, you know, and there's clients that are scalable that you can sit there and look at and it's like, all right, we're going to help you scale. We'll invest a little more. We'll help here. And I think that's one of the reasons when we were building Anchor is that we didn't get a lot of turnover in our clients, is because really we looked at them like, you know, not, we're just this, you know, you have the fiduciary where you're a lender borrower, but you look at the relationships like a partnership, and the people that want to scale, that are going towards there, if you support that effort, you know, it also helps grow your business as an investor and as a lender as well. And so there's a two-way street from that standpoint. So I think I got off topic a little bit, but I hope I answered your question.
Question about, do you partner with homeowners, and overall have you experienced good or bad things?
Yeah, you sounded a little muffled, but I'm gonna just, you're asked, the question I think was, do we partner with homeowners as well? And
Yeah, and then overall, how's that experience been, plus or bad?
I think it is very, very, very much so on the plus side. We don't make quite as much money, right, as if we bought the house at the price that we wanted to, but the risk is significantly lower. And I see it as a way for, I see that as a very scalable model. You know, that is, you can sit there and help them make more money. It is a win-win. You know, if it's not, now there's people that have come to us and we look at it and we're like, look, you should just sell it as is, and we turn that down because it's not a win-win, right? But I will say, of the people that we've done it that are happy, you know, well, everyone that we've done it with has been happy so far. um, and they refer you. You know, the benefit of, you know, certain demographics is that, you know, if you're helping someone who either just inherited a property, you know, their friends also have properties, friends or parents that might be of that same age, and they're inheriting properties, right? That those demographics then kind of beget more referrals. And so the agents that bring me those type of transactions, you know, we go through and we look at it and we're like, hey, look, here's how much more we think you can make, and here are the comps. And you know, sometimes it's, I mean, it's interesting because some of some of the times I've told, like I remember when we did one in Lakewood, and I told the guy, I'm like, I don't know, you know, for the extra like 30,000 you're gonna make, you should just sell it now. He's like, you know, 30,000 for me, what he said is gonna pay off my car, my wife's car, and a bunch of our credit cards. He goes, you may look at it as like, yeah, it's not really worth the effort. And for them, they looked at it, it's like, okay, that's a significant number. You know, from an investment standpoint, I looked at it like, all right, not really. I mean, that was a 3-week rehab for us. It was a very light rehab. Um, but you know, it's like, okay, we still did it. We did it mainly for the relationship with the real estate agent, because from a profitability standpoint, we didn't make a lot of money. But one of the things that we do with the real estate agents is they can either just get their commission, and we handle this design side of it and put up the money for those repairs and what have you. And some of the ones like, okay, this 12 unit that I mentioned was an owner redo. You know, we were going to participate in the upside with them, and they're like, look, we have money. We don't need you to put up the money. Can you take a smaller percentage of the upside you're creating if we put up the money? So here's a deal where you're talking about, you know, a pretty well-to-do owner who inherited a property, and they're like, yeah, we'll put out the 150. You don't have to, but instead of taking, let's say, 50% of the upside, will you take 25? We end up settling at 35. And because at 25, it wasn't really worth doing all that work, because that building, even though we're only spending 150, the real work product is in our team going in and negotiating all the increases and negotiating some of the other things that have to be done with those tenants while maintaining their tenancy so that we don't lose more tenants when we go to raise their rents. And so that's more labor intensive, but you know, they see the value. And so the benefit of those type of transactions is that it's a win-win, you know, and you have less at risk. Now, the negative side is that there's not a lot of lenders who are going to put up money for something like that, right? Because it's in, you know, well, this is an apartment building, so that would have been easy, but on many of the residential ones, right, they're considered consumer loans. And so most of the hard money guys won't touch that. You know, we do it a little differently because it's a joint venture. There's aspects to it that we feel create a barrier for that. And we're okay, you know, I'm comfortable doing some of those, you know, non-qualified mortgage type leads because I know that they have an exit. So the question I get a lot with these homeowner ones is, how many homeowners want to end up staying in the property, right? And because they love the house, right? And so part of that is that, you know, your screening process has to be such that you're going through, and if the person's saying, no, 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 we want to, like, no, why don't you make this room pink? Okay, because they have a daughter. Well, that's a good indication that they're not really planning on moving and they just want you to rehab their house, right? And so, but if they're sitting, so part of our contract is we get a power of attorney to handle all the design aspects of it. So they have really no say. They have to move out, right? So there's commitments from their side that will lead you to know that, yeah, they're serious about selling this property. And you know, we've not had anyone stay yet, but part of our contracts outline what happens if they opt to stay, right? And so, and what would be owed to us. And, we secure our interest so that they're aware that there's, they can do that and that's their house and that's their right to do. But we don't expect to not make anything because they opted not to sell. And so most people that are reasonable would be reasonable. If they start fighting you on that clause of it, that's another telltale sign that they have no intention of really selling it.
And agents don't mind the delay in the listing. I mean, they keep bringing you deals, even though.
So here's why. So most of the agents opt into JV with us. So while we're joint venturing with the owner, they're joint venturing with us and they throw their commission into the pot, right? So they end up making, in most cases, at least twice what their regular commission would have been. So that's the incentive of why they would do that.
Hey,
Cool.
Rob
Thank you.
has a question.
Sure.
So when you JV,
Huh?
on the other side, are you getting 35% of the rent as opposed to 35% of the upside?
No, we don't take any of the rent. It's just 35% on the extra equity that we created. So,
And is that harvested as a flip?
it's harvested as a flip. Yeah, we call it kind of homeowner flips is what we call them.
Thank you.
Yeah. So that's it. Yeah, and so if we put up the money, we treat the money like a different animal, right? It's separate. Those contracts are there. There's a lot of kind of contracts that go along with papering it properly. There's things that you have to do, to be kind of in compliance with not just licensing issues, but also in compliance with lending laws and not cross over into being considered a contractor, right? So you have to kind of document it properly in order to do it so that you're protected, and I think that that's probably a very good trend that's going on. I think that there's there's more and more real estate companies that a lot of the real estate companies, they have programs where they'll put up the money and they'll put up to, like, in most cases it's up to 50,000, some cases it's up to 25,000, and really they're talking about paint, some landscaping, and no real construction, right? So a lot of the houses that we get don't fit that bucket, right? They fit they generally need more than $50,000 worth of work, and it's more than just staging and landscaping and painting or changing countertops. I know that some of the companies, they don't want to do flooring. I mean, that's probably a very common thing, and so usually when we get them, it's because their company wouldn't do it even if they work for that company. And other times it's because they're also participating in the profit, and it's more than just a 6% listing, which is what the requirement is for a lot of the companies. The plus side for the owner is that there's no interest. We usually take an interest, right? So there's a return on the money that goes out, but sometimes it might not be a 6% return. It might be a 5% commission. Other times it might be a scenario where we make less than 50% of the increased equity. Other times it might be we're taking 35. We've gone as low as 25%. Where in fact I did one in that we capped the amount that we were going to make because it was an unknown. It was a high-end area, and they didn't want to tear down and build, which is what everyone was doing in that area. It was an inherited family home. And they said, look, we just want to give the opportunity for another family to have a nice house. We realize that you should tear it down and probably make 4,000 square feet, but we grew up in this house and we want to sell it as a 1,900 square foot house. And that's what it is. And, and we want to make sure that the buyer is a family that's going to live here. If they tear it down the road, we can't stop that, whatever, right? But really they wanted to sell the best house that was what they considered, in this case, it was an affordable $3.5 million house for the area, but it was still, and it got multiple offers. People submitted everything from videos to like letters and all that stuff because it was everybody else would have torn it down. Their other offers were all from developers who wanted to tear it down and build, and some were also offering to joint venture with them on doing the same thing, and that's not what they wanted to do. It was they grew up in the house and they felt like the essentially the from a respect issue to their parents and having all grown up here, they didn't want to tear it down. And so what we did in that case, we said, look, all of the comps are going to developers. We don't really know what a homeowner is going to build here because all of these small houses, the cost to build there, it may be the area was trading for like $1,200 a square foot. So you can do the math, right? Cost to build was running significantly less. Everyone was maxing these out. And so he said, look, we're gonna put out probably 100,000 and we're gonna cap our profit at 100,000 because there's a possibility that this could go really crazy. And it did. And so we made 100% return on our money. We were super happy with it, right? But they made almost an extra, God, I have to look it up, but it was over 400,000 extra that they made, and so they were elated. I think the agent's already gotten another referral from them. They have one of the siblings has a property that they own that they're wanting to do a similar process on. So these, when you create these win-win scenarios, just like in anything else, right? I mean, whether it's a marriage or you're dating or you have a business partner or you're doing these flips, if you don't create a win-win scenario and it's always a give and take or somebody's always taking, that relationship's not going to last very long. And I think that that's been the premise probably for my entire career, is to try to create win-win scenarios. Otherwise, just pass. That I think that that's important. It's the same thing with sharing. It's one of the reasons I've never done like the seminars. I do some mentorship now for kind of some clients that want to grow or they want to do things like that, or oddly enough, mostly hard money lenders. And there's other, they want to say like, oh, you guys built this company or you guys did this. And, and there's a couple of consulting companies that, they just pay the hourly rate for whatever it is their need. But for most of it, I got taught for free. And I kind of, as long as we're working together or working towards doing some deals together, I'm great at like helping out or helping to analyze deals. That's kind of, I enjoy doing that, and I'm doing it anyway because if I can participate being either a lender or a partner, we're going to make our money that way. And if I can save somebody some headaches from some of the benefit of having been a hard money lender for 17 years is you got to see everyone else's heartache when you were just a lender, right? And so you learned so much, right? So this is part of my knowledge, is that I saw everybody else make the mistakes that we didn't have to make. And so consequently now, we tried, I'm not saying we never make mistakes, that's not true, but we make, I think, a lot less than many people. And I think that's the added value that I bring to the table, which is why, I like this JV aspect to it, and the homeowner aspect for sure. When they start to see like the apartment building here that I mentioned, I was showing you how just increasing the rents was going to increase. They had lots of other brokers, and the commercial brokers are very sharp. They're very astute. And they're going to put together a very beautiful portfolio for you to see exactly why you should list with them. And
It's all numbers.
It's all numbers. And when we just sit there and show them the simple stuff, it's like, look, here's what we're going to do. It's not a matter of even questioning the listing or anything like that. It's just a matter of it's common sense, right? More income, same cap rate, you make more money. Sounds good. Let's do that. And so, that's one of the reasons I like apartment buildings. But it's the same thing with houses. If especially if they have a house that's not financeable, certain areas pay a premium for houses that are rehabbed. Other areas, there's not much upside. And so those areas where there's not much upside, we tend to just, even when they get presented, we're like, look, they don't need us. Like, there's not enough upside to warrant them doing it. And, and we don't want to get involved in scenarios where there's just not enough upside, because not only do we not make as much money, but also, if it's a scenario where we have to make a bunch of money, they're probably giving up some of their equity for us for no reason. And that's not what we want, right? We want to be able to sit there and say, hey, we're adding value. So at the end of the day, we can get their referrals, we can do more deals. And, and it goes back to that win-win.
Now, when you do these deals, you're talking about homeowner, you're not talking about owner occupants.
No, a lot of them are owner occupants.
They are owner occupants?
Yeah, but they move out.
Okay.
Yeah, so our requirements, they move out because it's too hard to work around them, and there's too much liability there.
Right.
And the other thing is that the reality is that one of the things that helps sell the houses is that they're easy to show. And so if you have a property, even if you're owner occupied, here, I'm going to just use this example. if you have a house and it's the exact same house as your neighbor's house, and one's occupied and one's not, the one that's not and it's staged is going to sell for slightly more than the other one, even though they're identical. And they can be staged the same. And the sheer difference is that when this agent wants to show this property to this client who said, hey, let's go see this house tonight, they can show that vacant house that's ready, beautiful, staged, well lit. Whereas the other one is like, oh, well, I'm in the middle of cooking dinner. When they walk in, it smells like a dog and steak, right? And all of a sudden, and they're like, oh, we're just leaving, the bed's not made and all this stuff. It's inconsistent. So that's going to naturally sell for a little bit less, right? And the other aspect is that the buyer is like, oh, they just remodeled this. I'm going to be the first person to live here, even though it's not new construction after the remodel, versus, okay, well, you know, some people are like, I gotta change the toilets, I gotta change the toilet seats, or I gotta, yeah, it's like, this isn't brand new, right? And so there's an inherent value there for that. So I think that if you're looking at those aspects, and from the most homeowners logically will understand that. And so even though they've got to move out, or they realize that that's an investment into, that's part of the investment into why they're going to make more money, you know, because of that consistency. Like this building here, it's got 3 vacancies. The owners asked us, they said, oh, great. Well, we're going to remodel this. Are we going to rent them out right away? I said, no, absolutely not. They said, why not? And I said, well, we want, you know, most other buildings that these buyers are looking for are all occupied, and they're not going to get to walk through these units. Ours, we're creating an opportunity for them to drive by, walk through, and walk in and see what some of the units look like. And so, you know, and they said, well, can we just leave one? And I said, well, why would you leave one when you could show them 3 and they can walk through and they feel like they did their inspection? If we do our job right, they're going to be emotionally tied to this building versus the other building that they couldn't walk through any of the units. And that emotional tie is going to equate to more dollars, period. It's just psychology, right? And so that's what our goal is. And so okay, we're going to give up 3,600 or 7,000. Would you give up 7,000 for potentially making an extra 150,000, 300? We don't know what that number is. It's hard to qualify that. But if it makes it easy to show and they walk through, and that agent can walk them through, and they can make a quicker decision on our building versus another building, that's the difference, right? That's the key part. And so that's kind of one of the things that we were expressing to them is you want to make it as easy for someone to make a decision as possible. And
I always liked them to be vacant because sometimes buyers work during the days, so they
Right.
can only look at it at night.
right, that's exactly right.
And you don't want the family in there watching the TV.
Well,
Um,
to that comment, we've always got a combo and the super lock on these. So because the super locks lock at 9 o'clock, so they don't allow showings after 9 o'clock, right? And there are some people that will want to go see this at, like, they're off work late and they want to go see it, and they're like, hey, can we show it? Like, yeah, there's a combo on it. Here's the combo.
And addressing, when you talked about you mentoring hard money lenders, having dealt with you in the past, if they just take the blueprint that you had for Anchor and marketing for Anchor, they will be successful.
Yeah, I did. I helped. Well, I won't say his name, but one of the guys, I think everyone here knows. I know you know. He was mentioned earlier, but I mean, he said I've probably almost doubled his income on some of the things, because just something simple, like he wasn't collecting late fees. He wanted to do all prepaid interest, and I said, so you want to pass on all that profit? He's like, what do you mean? I said, well, I mean, they're just literally, everybody who makes the payments late is just giving you 10% extra. That's a good return. I mean, I think we were at one point making almost 80,000 a month just off of late fees. It adds up.
Hey, Robert,
People don't realize that or think about it. Go, TC.
if someone wanted to actually invest with you, is there any way that they get a copy of your spreadsheet so they can be able to run the numbers successfully the way you like them?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, if we're doing deals together, I'm going to share that, and you're going to have all that with me. I provide it to, initially, most people that call me, I give just kind of a screenshot of it so they can see the numbers are. But if we're doing deals, of course.
You mean text you?
Text me. Look at here. I'll tell you what. I'll put my info on the sheet here to everyone. I don't mind. Texting works best for me. And so I'm going to put my email, and also, but don't email me. The best part is really, this is my direct cell number. And if you text me, you know, I do clear out my text messages by the end of the day. I'm going to say 95%, maybe 98% of the time. If you email me, I get, unfortunately, copied on every email conversation on every transaction I'm a part of, whether or not I've requested it 110 times not to do. But, you know, and so it junks up my email box. So I don't tend to look for emails unless you tell me, hey, look for this email. Every so often I glance through. But if you text me and say, hey, I just emailed you this stuff, I'll take a look at it. Even easier is if you just text me, like what I said is the property address, purchase price, rehab, and your ARV, plus, you know, maybe a brief explanation as to what you want to do with the deal, then I'll give you a pretty quick response. I mean, there's you know, there's a saying, you can't steal in slow motion, right? So you got to move quick on these deals. And I'm going to try to give you the quickest response I can. It's either a quick yes or a quick no. If it's a quick no, it's a quick no. But, you know, and here's why. So at least, you know, we'll get an understanding as to what it is.
You're talking about flips. Do you do anything else?
Like
Are you doing anything else right now?
I'm some development stuff, but it's mostly larger affordable housing things. We've got some stuff in LA where we've
Okay, that's where I was going.
yeah,
Because a couple of years ago we talked about you were getting in affordable housing, and we
Yeah.
both know that that's a front way
Yeah.
out in the future type thing.
yeah. I now that I'm looking at, you know, I have like I have a friend that he's handling most of the paperwork for all these things, because I don't really have like the whole office set up with, you know, like Anchor, where so his office draws all the docs and does all that. And I've partnered with him on a few deals, and one of them, you know, that actually I wasn't a part of, but I saw the numbers and I'm like, wow, this is a great, great. It was they bought during quarantine, right? They bought a great deal on an Applebee's and managed it better, and then resold it, and I think they made almost $1 million on it, you know, over a year period, which is a great return. So there's opportunities. A lot of these listen, there's going to be a lot of opportunities in businesses, in commercial, in multifamily, you know, but you really have to get, and I don't pretend to be the expert in everything like but I know people that are, and I'm going to reach out to them when those opportunities come through so we can accurately assess it. If it's on the residential side or the multifamily side, I got that covered. So, you know, that's I've done that. I've done a few commercial deals, but nothing significant. I probably reach out. I know enough to know that if you have the same complex side by side and one of them has, you know, Starbucks and Subway, and the other one has, you know, Tito's sandwiches and you know, Joe's coffee, it's going to sell for less than the one with the national recognized brands, only from a perspective of potential buyers. You know, they know that those brands aren't going anywhere, and so they're not going to have any issues with those tenants, whereas the other ones are a question mark. And even if the income's the same, they're going to get a lower cap for that one with the national tenants in it.
Are you looking at? I know you do some commercial deals. Are you looking to maybe get commercial properties via bad commercial notes? Not bad, but
So, you know, I like the note play. You know, it's so I have a so one of the girls that brings me deals, right? She works with a note buyer, and he's out of New York. He's got all of these notes, and what she's doing is she's now trying to settle all of his notes so he gets paid off, because he bought them at like just such huge discounts a long time ago, and in many of these he's never even reached out to the owner yet, and so he's just sitting on it. He's on title. He's waiting. He's never collected a payment. Never even sent a letter, right? And she's doing the outreach. And in many cases, these people, they've not made payments since like 2008. You know, not just to him, but not even on the first, because they've got some guy that's you know, been delaying the foreclosures by, I'm going to call it rent skimming and bankruptcy fraud, you know, because that's kind of right. But she's going through and settling some of those, and then, you know, some of them just sell retail, right? And others she brings to me and it's like, hey, this is a fixer, we can do it. And the benefit is that she's connected with the investor, so at least most of his are seconds, right? But at least part of that is already negotiated, and they've got to negotiate whoever is on the first. But I'll give you an example. One of the deals she brought to me, I mean, there might be $1 million in profit on it. That if that deal goes, like if we just tied it up, but if that deal goes, that will likely be the best single deal we'll do this year.
Grand slam.
Yeah, grand slam, absolute grand slam.
Okay, hold on for a second.
Sure.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are at the end of the regular meeting. I appreciate you guys. If you want to stay, we can talk real estate all night long. We can break everything down to a microscience to help you get your deals done. But for those who have to leave now, you can go ahead quietly. Just remember to go to all our social media sites to meet up, the website, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter. Tell us what you think of how we're doing, how we can improve, and Lord no, put the word out there that I need help. Okay. Next month, because of the situation with Aaron Norris, Bill Tan has jumped in and said that he will speak. So come back next month. Everybody's more than welcome. I thank you for coming out.
Week speaker next month. Week.
Hardly.
But I thank you for coming out. I appreciate the patience and everything. So I hope to see you guys next month and in the future. So go ahead, Robert, continue.
Yeah, so it's well, I mean, I will just go back to questions here because that's, I think, really the best part is if we can figure out how to help you guys get the most you can out of these meetings. That's the whole goal of the club, right?
Whoever got the TV on, turn it off.
That's Dave. I muted him.
Okay.
So yeah, but going back to like the commercial thing with the notes, I mean, I do think that there's opportunities with the notes. I haven't done a lot of the notes because a lot of the problem for me is that I'm looking for yield, and with the fix and flips, the yield is kind of more established and known, right? Because it's quick. And I do like that some of these most of the notes that we do, they're I'm going to call them kind of self-created, right? We originate them, and even the stuff that's a little bit longer term, we can do that because we just sell it off. We've got some lines of credits that we can put like longer term buy and hold type money, but it's certainly not like cheap money, right? It's not the 2 3/4% or 3.5%. It's going to be in that 5 to 6% range. All good?
Excuse me while I have to put down on my calendar that I'm speaking for him next month. Otherwise, I'll forget.
Yeah, definitely don't forget that. Yeah, I saw Aaron's post. I teased him a little bit about his shirtless post. I don't know if you got to see him.
And I didn't see that. I just know that it was a tumor. Was a tumor in one of the
Heart.
in the heart itself?
Yeah, and right now they said it turned cancerous. They didn't get all of it, so he can't do anything until a couple of months. He's got 60 days. He needs a rest, and then they're gonna do more testing from that point. So he can't do anything. So
Yeah.
he's doing this all get out right now.
Well, listen, if you guys, I believe in the kind of power of positive thinking and prayer, and so if you guys, all do. He's a good guy. If you don't know him, take our word for it. He's a just fantastic guy. You just keep him in your thoughts because he's not just his dad kind of really brought a lot of things to light in the industry. His dad's a good guy, but he himself has done so much work for our industry behind the scenes. He's a really great guy. If you haven't met him, I hope you get an opportunity to meet him at one point because he's I'm fortunate to have met him and know him, well enough to at least give this recommendation, which I don't often get.
But the funny part about it, Robert, is that he never wanted to get into business.
Right. He wanted to be on Broadway.
Exactly. He never wanted to get into business, and he ended up working for Wall Street and became one of the gurus of marketing.
Yeah, well, that's the thing about real estate, right? It sucks you in.
I tell you what, he's taken my financial calculator, real estate finance 101, and he's also taken my creative financing class. And he was like the sharpest pencil in the room.
Yeah, he's a sharp guy. He's a sharp guy. So anyway, good thoughts going out to him for sure. And all right, any other questions? Anything you guys want to pick up on, or?
You better get him while he's hot, because this guy's always busy. Trust me. Every time I call him, he tell me, text me, text me.
This is great. I love text. I love these Zoom calls. This is great. I mean, I hope this is something that kind of stays around for a long time. You know, I've noticed with some of the like Wall Street guys that we talk to, you know, there are people you can't really get in with, and these like Zoom things are much easier to connect with people.
Robert, this is Sharon again. You mentioned ADUs, which I'm trying to be in my niche right now, and you said you didn't really like them, but then it came up about affordable housing, and you're interested in that. So can we like reconcile how you're supporting affordable housing but not really liking ADUs?
So yeah, so you know, the difference for me is this: is I'm flipping most of the things, and so from a flip perspective, you know, the appraisals on ADU don't always come in even for what you've put into them. And so unless you found an area like, let's say, Highland Park, Eagle Rock, some parts of Hollywood, which are, there's a lot of ADU comparable sales.
Right.
You know, a lot of times it doesn't warrant putting the money in. Like if you did an ADU in, let's say, I don't know, Lamar. In which one? Yeah, if there's no comparable sales,
right,
I tend to just stay away from it. You know, I had one like I was going to do, and we had everything approved and ready to go in Highland Park. No, I'm sorry, that was Eagle Rock. In Eagle Rock, and there were comparable sales for it. What we ended up doing was we sat there and we said, okay,
cheers.
Let's ignore.
Tyler's mute yourself.
Yeah. So what we did is we sat there and we looked at the ADU and the cost of the ADU and the comps, and between the time we bought it and we're getting the ADU approved, there weren't as many new ADU comps, and the new single family comps had already got caught up to the value of what we were going to sell it with the ADU, that we opted to not build the ADU because we made the same amount of money and saved the $80,000 it was going to cost to do. So it was like, it's like, all right, I think you just have to kind of assess the area that you're doing it. If you can get the appraisal because there's comparables, then you can go for it by all means, right? But there's a lot of areas where I see these deals pitched out as ADUs and they're no deal. The other kind of, I guess, pitfall for them is I see a lot of people doing ADUs on multifamilies, right? So they're taking 3 units or 4 units. And the problem is that Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac don't have a guideline to say, okay, hey, these are real units. They're still considered accessories. And so the problem is now you get caught, like let's say you've got a 4 unit and you're going to do an ADU and a junior ADU.
Right.
But really you're 6 units, right? But really you're still 4 units. And now you've excluded yourself from one of the GSE type financing because they've ruled out those like right now the rule for them is that if it is a non-sanctioned unit, right? So not an accessory, so an accessory doesn't count for that they're not going to finance it under the 1 to 4 rule, right? And so, and then when you go into the commercial rule, the problem is that it's not a real unit. It's considered an accessory.
Right.
And so the appraisers ding you for that. So all of a sudden your value, you don't get the full value of it. And then you've spent all this money and you've got the income, but unless you've got a buyer that's either a cash buyer or a 1031 that doesn't care, you're not going to, the appraisal is going to come in low. And so we've passed on so many of those because, it would be great if they came out with a rule and said, yeah, this is it's a unit. We're going to count the income. But appraisers out there, I mean, it runs the gamut from some appraisers saying, hey, we're only going to give it 50% or 50% of the value, right? Because it's detached.
Right.
They're like, well, what if it's attached? And they're like, well, it's even though unless you have direct access to it, it's not considered living area. It's considered an accessory. And we're like, well, it's really still a unit. We can have, in some cities, they'll let you do a second meter, right? A different meter. In other cities, they won't.
Right.
And so, then you're master metered. And so that rule isn't set. I mean, but like even in the city of LA, where you've got separate meters for it and all that stuff, and really, I mean, outside of the parking, it's a real unit, right? It's a completely different unit.
Right.
Even there, some of the appraisers give it only 50% value. So unless you're in an area where the comps justify doing it, I tend
Like, yeah, and I know some of the lenders are using the HUD appraisers or whatever that's been trained with that, and then they're lending on the after value, so they know that once the unit is complete, that the property is going to be up, and then they will go from a, say, construction loan to a refinance. But that's all calculated up in front, so we know that we're going to make some money on it. But not everybody's doing that, so yeah, I understand.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I see the value from, I mean, if you're a homeowner and you own this property and you can convert a garage, right? Then I mean, there's definitely value in that for a homeowner.
Right.
But for a investor who's flipping,
Right.
it's 50-50. I mean, in some areas,
Yeah.
most areas,
More of a buy and hold. Yeah.
Yeah.
The homeowner. Okay.
Yeah, the buy and hold plays a whole different play.
Right.
And that goes back to the like the sheet I was showing you. I would draw up a different one based on the comparables and what it does to the income of other units that have that. And so if you can't, the problem is that with the multifamily, right? If let's say you're adding an ADU and a junior ADU, if you're not buying and holding it, or even if you're buying and holding it, there's not enough comps to be able to sit there and fight with an appraiser. So many times you're going to get caught in that kind of that limbo area, right? And not get the return or get your money back out of it.
Right.
So that's one of the issues. I have one right now that we're looking at in East LA. It's a legal triplex. It's an existing 4-unit, and it really should be 5 units. And so, but it's a legal triplex, right? That's what it is legally.
Right.
And they built this oversized house, like a, I don't know, 3,100 square foot house. And it's really 2 3-bedroom units that they did. They have a back unit that they built, and then the front 2 units, in order to get it legalized, they combined 2 units and made it into one. So it's a 5-bedroom house. The reality is it's a 1-bedroom and then a 2-bedroom unit, right? If you just put one wall back up. And so we would end up with 5 units, and we're thinking of just keeping it because from a cash flow perspective, it makes sense. But from a refinance perspective, the challenge is, okay, we're going to have like 200,000 into this deal because even though the income's good, we're not going to get it to appraise for what we needed to appraise for to get more of our money back out.
Right. And I think after 24 months of collecting the rent, then that can be used towards the refinance and everything because they're considered more like income property at that time or apartment.
Yeah, but don't forget that during COVID, right? Because of these times, they're not taking 100% of the income at all. Even on the regular units right now, they're cutting the income because of COVID and some of the deferred payments that are out there.
Okay.
So it's a little trickier now, which is, by the way, why I think there's opportunity in that multifamily side, right? The trickier it is where people can't figure it out, that's I think where you can make some money.
Okay. And so when your friend, you was talking about affordable housing, what are you considering in affordable housing with you and your partner?
Well, like one we're building, it's a 56 unit. We've got 2 of the floors already rented out. One's rented to housing, the other one's rented to it's some transitional, it's like part of the health department in the city of LA. We're keeping 2 of the floors, and then the first floor is commercial. But it was honestly, I was kind of, I'm a little less excited about the way it was being built in that the parking requirements, because we had, TOC bonuses that we were getting that, like, I mean, here, we got a 56 unit with 8 parking spaces, right? I mean, the neighbors are going to freaking hate us. The neighbors are going to hate us when this thing is built. That's the bottom line, right?
But isn't it near a rail line?
Yeah. Well, it's not near a rail line. Yeah, but it's LA. You're not going to get the attention. Like my argument. So I did my internal pro forma based on much lower rents, because if I was going to rent it, same thing, right? You put yourself in the shoes of the tenant. Unless you're getting assistance, and this is the building that you have to go into. If you're going to try to rent this at market rate, and you can rent another unit that has parking, and this one doesn't, and not only does it not, but we're going to screw up the parking for like probably a 2-block radius. I mean, it's the reality, right?
Right.
Okay, yeah, they approved it, they did that, the income still makes sense, but we're not going to get on the units that we can go to market on. We're not going to get market rents. I have a bet. I have a standing dinner bet. We'll see how it plays out, right? But on my bet is we're not getting market rents for those units because I mean, just think about it. If you were a tenant and you're at 56th in Compton, right, or 54th in Compton in South Central,
Right.
you have to park 2 blocks away because we've messed up the parking for everybody.
Right.
You're going to pick another unit if you can do it versus pay the market rent for this thing, right? I mean,
Right.
think about it logically, right? Logically, I get home late at night. I can pull into my carport, or I can walk 2 blocks.
Right. Exactly.
It's
Is that
common.
with groceries?
What's that? With your groceries, that's right. So it's yeah. I am shocked, however, in that South Central area that, I mean, these houses on like that are south and even like east and west of Crenshaw now are getting $1 million for 2,000 square feet. Is
Yeah. Exactly.
crazy.
Exactly.
I had a house on Fourth Avenue, and God, what was that? It was like probably 54th and 4th Avenue that I bought years ago for, I think we paid $24,000 for. And we sold it, we flipped it, but I'm just that sticks in the back of my head. I'm like, and now this is going for $1 million. It's
Right. I looked at, I was on a call with SCAG yesterday, and they were talking about the highest ADU rent in LA, 4,888 for like a 700 accessory dwelling unit in somebody's backyard, 700 square feet.
well, you see these fourplexes that are being built, which, by the way, I mean, I think they're very profitable. In fact, we're looking at just building these now and just instead of selling them, just keeping them because the cash flow is so good.
Right.
But the reality is, the problem is that a lot of the reasons the cash flow is good because they're now being built as 4+4s, 5+5s, and they're really renting out a lot of the rooms to individuals, right? And which is why you get so much rent for these.
Right.
And so they cash flow well, but some of my clients are the guys that build these regularly, and they're probably I'm going to say 1, 2, and 3 top builders in the city. And I know 2 of them. One of them already stopped selling them. He's just keeping everything. He's like, yeah, how could I? And the other one asked me, he's like, should I keep these? And I said, well, what are the numbers? And on some of the numbers, he's like, well, if I rent it out this way, he's basically cash flowing $13,000 a month after having $100,000 in the deal.
Wow.
Right. Yeah, I know. Right, Bill. So he's going to be here, Bill. So he's going to be into the deal for 1.6. It's worth probably 2.4 to 2.5. And when he refinances, he's got almost all of his money back out, except for about 100, maybe 150 on some that he leaves in. And it's net. The worst one was netting him at $11,000 a month.
11,000 on 100,000.
100, right.
Wow.
And I'm like,
That's 11,000 a month, folks. Multiply that times 12.
right. So he asked me, he's like, well, what should I do? I'm like, why are you selling any of these? Just keep them. I'm like, your payback is in a year.
Less.
Right. Just keep it. It's because he's getting a 2.75% refinance at a 10-year interest only. I mean, it's almost free money. It's craziness. Anyhow, all right.
I was
Right.
going to mention something. When people ask me about ADUs right now, and I just say, just consider renting them for a few years because the value will not be recognized in appraisal until things catch up. And that's not going to be for a few years.
Right. I mean, here's the other thing. Here's a kind of a little nugget for you guys. If you guys are looking to buy and hold, please go to like the city council meetings and whatever cities you're looking for, and just find out what they're getting ready to rezone. There's a lot of cities that did not meet their affordable housing like requirements, and the state mandated that they provide more housing. So I live in Irvine. Irvine's one of these cities, right? And where they've now rezoned a bunch of areas for multifamily to build more because they were so far under their requirement. Huntington Beach, some of these other cities. I mean, just there's a lot of cities like that. I mean, every city around, has these areas that they are upzoning. And so my parents are fortunate that they own some land in Hollywood, and and they upzoned it, right? And so all of a sudden you can build, you know, if they basically get together with some of the neighbors and they sell it, you can now build a high rise there, And so it's like, so just imagine if you're buying something like a duplex or somewhere in an area that all of a sudden, okay, it's zoned for a duplex and it gets upzoned so that you can build multifamily and in 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 units. You may not do that now, but at some point, right, that value is going to be there where you want to do that, and that's where you can really like make a lot of money. I mean, it's the same thing to buy one versus the other. If because you're paying attention that this is the area they're designating for something, that's you can really, I mean, it's I wish I would have paid attention to like Hollywood, for instance. I grew up in Hollywood, so I'm picking on this. I knew Hollywood like the back of my hand, and I remember driving through there. I'm like, I didn't even recognize the street I grew up on because it had changed so much because of the zoning had changed, because they had the subway, and there was exits for the subway there, and they upzoned that area from probably R2 to R5, right? And so R5 is high rise, so that's big. It's a big difference because all of a sudden the value of your land is worth significantly more than whatever your little fourplex is worth, because some developer's going to come by and combine 5 or 6 of those and build a high rise. And if you're going to be a part of it, you'd rather take an area where they're going to upzone so you can make more money than one that's going to stay stagnant or they're going to downzone. So that's just part of it's that that kind of publicly spoken crystal ball that no one pays attention to.
And is there value to also become known to the city council?
To becoming what?
Also become known since you attend the meetings.
Well, I think, I mean, there's certainly value in that. I mean, like here, I'll give you, so the partner on this deal that is this affordable housing project, right? He's really well involved with politically. And, and there are, I'm not going to call them favors. They're not necessarily favors, but there are introductions that they make, like, hey, this department can rent this floor out and they'll pay this market rent. So guess what? When you have one tenant instead of 14, right? And they're paying you every month, whether or not their units are rented, vacant, whatever, there's value in that. If we went to go resell the building, right? This building we can't resell because there's the way we structured it, but there's value in that. Just think about if you were looking to buy buildings and we've got the city of LA that's the tenant for 2 of the floors. It's a pretty good tenant to have, right? I mean, it's you're getting paid. So, and it's less, and they're managing those people, so you don't have to do it. I mean, that's, there's definitely plays and there's upside on that. That particular building was a different structure because we didn't take Measure H money. So, I mean, if you're looking to get into developing, you've got to learn all of the ways there's so many different ways to finance these buildings. And, some of them are lucrative for developers, others are lucrative for owners. We took the owner route instead of the developer route.
So I got a question. How is COVID affecting any of the residential units, COVID wise?
So I've had no effect whatsoever. I've had everyone pay. I did have one building where they first said, hey, we're going to do and I had debt on that building. We're going to do forbearances, this and that. I called, I asked, it's going to affect your credit at all? They said no. where I just gave the tenants, like I took that for, like I let them forbear for 3 months. And when we were all in lockdown, I'm like, you guys don't need to pay. Just, that was it. And I had a friend who he's had a building for a year that he's done so well in this past year. His tenants, he's not accepted rent from them for a year, not as a deferral, just as a just thing, right? But I mean, you don't have to do that, but I'm just saying that yeah, it's not as significant as I think, the media was making it out to be. I hadn't seen that. I've talked to friends who are, property managers and have significant, doors under management, and they've not seen a significant like increase it where they had to waive income and do all of that stuff. And there is some stuff that's on the books now that hasn't come out yet, but it looks like it'll probably pass where they're going to reimburse homeowners, or like landlords a certain amount to forgive a certain percentage of those rents.
80-20, 80-20.
Right. So, that's gonna, like, I mean, that's kind of a win, right?
Well, it's less of a loss, but what about when that's over? Is that going to get the tenant to start paying if they're only paying 25%?
I would expect that. So here, look at, this goes back to the demographics, right? The demographics for like the US are so great that I don't really see us having this big issue. If you think back pre-COVID, I think you have to put like this kind of quotes COVID timeline in quotes, because I mean, this was a very specific scenario. But prior to COVID, right, the biggest risk was actually that we were approaching full employment. And the problem with full employment, well, that sounds great, everybody can work and they've got a job, is that the backbone of the country is really the small businesses. And the small businesses get hurt most during a period when you're full employment, because they are also the ones that, because you're a small business, the owners are living, they're using that money. It's not a public company that can just raise capital easily. And when you approach full employment, the larger public company can recruit against you, and you won't be able to compete because they can just pay whatever, and they'll start stealing your employees. And so you'll start having small businesses that start to fail and so forth because they don't have the manpower, or they just can't expand and grow with the marketplace. So they lose market share and then they fail. So that's one of the risks. And I think that by, I would say, the end of probably 2022, we'll probably be back at pre-COVID employment levels. The demographics are such that, you've got baby boomers that are aging out. You've got the silent generation that's aging out. You have people that are baby boomers that are retiring more so than aging out. Aging out is kind of a nice way of saying dying, right? but it's the silent generation's aging out. Baby boomers are retiring. They're less workforce, and the millennials are just such a giant force that I don't think you can underestimate the amount of like productivity that they bring to the table. And more so, it's just the American like work ethic it's unlike anything in the world. And so, that is one of the reasons where you still have so much foreign investment that comes into the US. As screwed up as you might want to like politics one way or the other, it doesn't really matter. From a worldview and an investment strategy, right? The US is very stable. And so even though our deficit's going up, here's the way I equate the deficit. You own a $10 million house and you have $100,000 in debt. Who fucking cares? Doesn't matter. It's not as big of a deal as what people are saying about it. Sorry for the language, but it is at the end of the day, it is based on the ability for us to produce. And there's two things that we've got going for us is one's both a positive and a negative, is that we're a consumer nation, right? We consume products like unlike anything else. And part of it is that American dream that you can't, if you want, you can. And I think that is, at the forefront of this particular generation that's just hitting their prime age and their spending years. They're forming households, they're forming families. They're doing it, by the way, they're doing it like 8 to 10 years later than previous generations. But they are now doing it. And that's is going to propel us really forward. Now, I'm not saying that we're not going to have a correction or anything along those lines. I just don't see it happening 2022, 23, maybe 24, And there's some outliers here, right? There's for sure some that are probably, I would put it 5 to even as high as 7% outliers, which is, by the way, 5% is really high for an outlier, right? Ideally you want to have that at like a 1 or 2%. And so, but I don't know that I would sit there and gamble against the demographics. I won a bunch of dinner bets during the like COVID where the market's going to crash. I'm like, there's nothing showing that it's going to crash. Like right now, everyone's talking about inflation. There's a difference between inflation and pent up demand. And there's at a certain point where pent up demand turns into inflation. And we're getting close to that, right? But for the most part, you have people that the US savings rate has increased, in part that we were given a bunch of money, right? And the other part is that when you're quarantined, you just don't spend as much money because you're not out there spending. So naturally, the savings rate's going to go up. But the other part is that, when you sit there and you look at the mass amount of money that was put into the economy, and then you couple that with the demographics of the millennials and the baby boomers and the Gen Xers and Gen Yers and everybody else that's still in that workforce. You look at other countries like Japan or China and they're, Russia. Pick any of the developed countries, Germany, all of them have aging like labor forces. We don't. Even India, who's like a giant, right? They've got an aging population. We are the only country right now that has the best prime age workforce, period. And that's why foreign investment continues to come in. And so as long as that continues, right, we're going to do pretty well. And so I think that from a standpoint of inflation, going back to that pent up demand, when you have people that didn't like this year, I have a friend who owns, I don't know, about 100 AT&T stores. And he had his best year ever, his retail. I'm like, how did that work out? He said, well, the people that went in to shop. Nobody was just going in to look for like cell phones. If they went in with a mission, because nobody wanted to be in a retail establishment in public because we didn't know what this whole COVID thing was like, right? And so consequently, he didn't have to have as much staff. He could have a quarter of the staff, and people were making appointments. And when they came in and they spent money. Every single person came in to spend money. Nobody really came in to like, oh, the only reason they didn't spend money is if he didn't have the product that they were looking for. And so his profitability went through the roof. And so, you sit there and you look at all of this things, and that multiplies into all of these different companies, which is why we now have a 26% cash buyer ratio. Is because there's a lot of people that got hurt, for sure. There's a lot of businesses that thrived, that they made the changes they had to make. And now the consumer is getting back out there and they're spending. And you know what? And I'm not sit there and say, go out and spend, but we are a spending nation. That's what we do. It's not like Canada where you have to requalify for a mortgage every, I don't know, what is it, 7 or 10 years, I think Christy said, right? Yeah, you get a 30-year mortgage, but you have to requalify for it every so often. So if your debt changed, they don't have to extend it, basically.
Wow.
Right. And so we have the benefits of a 30-year mortgage and a 40-year mortgage. And you can buy houses and you can do a lot of things here that you can't do other places. And even with taxes increasing and so forth, it's still a great place to be. And so I think that at the end of it, I don't really see things changing significantly, but there are some outliers and things that can happen. I think in order to have inflation, and why real estate's going bad, or I'm going to say just crazy right now, is that normally when real estate's going crazy, it's tied into so many other things, and the Fed can raise rates. Can't raise rates when you're more worried about the GDP than the income, than the value of real estate, right? And they don't want to slow down the economy when it's just barely getting recovered. And so right now they've got to let real estate run a little wild. And so you won't see them really raise a bunch of interest rates. Even though I think they should, and I think it'd be healthier if they did, which is not something you would normally hear a real estate investor saying. But we can't have 10% appreciation when we're supposed to have 2%. 4% is unhealthy. 10% is terrible. It's not. Great. Hey, we're saying it's terrible all the way to the bank right now because we're making money, right? But you'd rather have this last for 10 years instead of 2, right? And so that's the reality, that at some point we're probably going to pay the piper for this 10%. increase, year over year. Even, I mean, just think about it. Went up 10% in COVID times, right? When everybody thought the market was going to crash, I mean, we got some really good deals, but the reality is that, it didn't. Pent up demand, because what actually happened was people were living in their place and they're like, wow, this place sucks. I want to buy. I want to move. I want to buy. I want to do all this. Remodeling shot through. I mean, I went to Home Depot to go pay for like something with some of my guys, and I'm trolling for parking. I'm sitting here driving around waiting to like go out and spend money, because it's just, that's how crazy it is right now. So, anyhow, I hope that answers your question a little bit, but.
Somebody else have a question. I don't know who that is.
This is Daniel.
Daniel.
Estes. Good afternoon or good evening, excuse me, late evening. Thank you for
Where are you? You asked good afternoon. Where are you?
Okay, man. He's like, hey, I woke up at 2.
Yeah, this is my evening shift. This is what I do. No, there's a lot of good information. One of the things I wanted to ask you about was, what leading indicators do you look for when you're trying to identify what this direction is going, whether it's good or bad? I don't always go by interest rates, because I know interest rates are lagging indicators. Usually, market's already made an adjustment.
Oh man, that's I'll tell you what. There are definitely some things to look for. I had a chart here that I used to put up for people when they ask this question.
Yes.
And
I remember.
Find it. I'll see if I can find it, but it is a. I will say there's about 7 of them, and I think about 4 of them have been checked off.
Yeah.
And so while that sounds like a significant problem, we're so far away from some of the other ones being checked off that it's just not an issue, and one of them is just, when you have GDP that's negative, so you have to look at. I'm going to say this. You have to ignore a lot of the data that's going to come out in the next 6 months, because this year over year data means almost nothing. When you had a drop and they're like, it's gone up this much, it's crazy, or it's now down this much, just look at it in relation to where it was. So eliminate this COVID quarantine period and look at what was happening pre. And there's a saying in economics that trends matter, right? That's saying, just remember that. So forget about all of this stuff. It's the trend line that you're looking for. And right now, the trend line is out of whack. And it's out of whack because we had this giant drop, right? And so whatever you're looking at, the trend line's off. Eventually, and it's going to happen over the course of the next year, you're going to find the new trend line. And that's really what matters. So even with like the points that I'm hoping I can find it here, if I can find it very quickly, but it's and if not, if you text me, I'll find it and I'll send it to you. I will say that.
Did you just say? Oh, you did say text you. You didn't say email.
No, I did say text. Yeah. I will say that you've got to sit there and look at it and just be kind of cognizant that there's narratives for both sides right now, whichever side you want to be, if you want to be the inflation side or not. But I will say, don't listen to a lot of the people that are making money off of scaring you, the Harry Dents of the world, Motley Fools of the world, right? They're in the seminar business.
Right.
Yeah. And I'll pick on Harry Dent for a second, but you sit there and his whole job is to scare the hell out of you to pay, X amount of dollars to attend his seminar or buy into his subscriptions, and while he's like, I predicted the 2008. Yeah. He also didn't predict every fall from prior to 2008, right? That one he's going to glom on to, like, I got this one right, and that's the same thing. Every single year, it's been doomsday, and so the anti kind of central bank people have been screaming that it's inflated, it's going to crash, it's going to crash. Eventually, they're going to be right, and but they're wrong so much more than they're right, that you just can't listen to those people. You got to listen to the people that are reasonable. Right. I mean, I have a friend who you guys should follow. He's on both Facebook and Instagram. It's Logan I want to butcher his last name. Moshe Tommy. He was an economist for a lender, and then he's since retired. But I'll tell you, he's probably, I don't necessarily agree 100% with him, but I will say that he's one of the more reasonable people. That's an economist that, has kind of nailed a lot of the stuff, and there's times where I've disagreed with him, and, and I'm like, look, I'm seeing this, and what he's looking at this. I'll premise this because he looks at a little bit longer period than I do because I'm flipping, right? So I look at short-term bursts. If I buy, like, what's this next 4 months going to happen? And I remember when we were having problems finding labor, he's like, nah, the data doesn't show that. I'm like, well, I'm feeling it right now. I can tell you. But it would correct itself. So yeah, it mattered during that 4-month period, right? But over the long, let's say 1 year period, he was right. And so I do like guys like that. And there's a few guys like that that are just kind of reasonable to listen to. They're not super glowy when there's stuff that's bad. If you knew them back then, they're like, this is what's happening. And they explain it properly, better than I can. But and sometimes, honestly, I think it's a little too general, because us real estate investors, we really want, like, what is exactly going to happen over the next 6 months?
Yeah, awesome.
Right. And they don't give you that, right? They give you a little bit, you have to read in between the lines a little bit. And, but I will say that even him right now during this time, I mean, he's got a little bit of warning bells for certain things, but overall he's like, it's temporary. And it's the same thing I'm telling you is the trend lines are going to matter. It's the demographics that play a bigger role into that than the short-term things. Like wood is a great example of one, or even oil, right? We're seeing oil, which actually has the effect that can lead into inflation. It's not not like before where it was OPEC that was kind of reducing production and everything else. We've got a couple of major plants that are offline. One due to storm, another due to fire, there's a reason for it behind. Wood is the same thing, right? We've got tariffs coming in from Texas. We get most of our wood from Northern California, and they had all those fires. So guess what? You can't just plant a seedling and get a new tree and then we're back in business. That takes time to work through. And so, alternatively, we get wood from Canada, but there's tariffs on that wood. So that's driving prices. And then you couple that with pent up demand, prices going up, new housing starts that increase. All of these little things end up being what we got today. It's not, oh my God, it's inflation. No, it's a combination of like probably 7 things that are leading to the wood prices today. So if you listen to Harry Dent, it's inflation. It's going crazy. Buy gold, right? Buy gold, buy houses, buy whatever. So it's that's just, you just got to look at it for what it actually is. Follow some things, you don't even have to read everything, but Barron's is a good one, right? It's slightly unbiased. It's investor friendly. And so it gives you kind of what I was telling Vincent earlier, or not Vincent, I think it was maybe Josh or someone, or who was Arthur, that, when you're talking to investors, you just want to get the straight news. You don't want all the BS or the opinion. You want to make your own decision. And so if you're following some of the media that is just giving you the data, you're going to get a more unbiased, less scary view of things.
Okay.
Robert, can you spell Logan's last name?
Yeah, I'm going to actually here. I will. Let me pull it
I
up.
was trying to Google it and it didn't come up with my spelling.
Yeah, I'll give it to you right now. I think it's his full name.com too. Let me see here. I'll pull him up. Here, I'll post his name on the group.
Thank you.
There you go. So Motashami, there we go. I screw that up. Anyway, yeah, good guy to follow if you're looking for unbiased, kind of not necessarily the sky is falling aspect of things. And when the sky's falling, he'll tell you this isn't good, And so, yeah, I've been fortunate to speak like the same conference with him. Is actually how we met. And he introduced himself as, in fact, I still have the business card when he first introduced himself. He wrote "Data Geek" on it. I'm like, all right, my type of guy. So, all right, any other questions? As we're
What do
No?
you think? What, hey, Robert?
Yeah.
What do you think of the future of landlord business in California?
With regards to which part?
Landlord.
Landlord?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, look, this is a very, I mean, if you're looking to invest and you want to have properties that's near you, there's still ways to make money here, and it's not the most landlord friendly state. There are areas that are a little bit more landlord friendly. Orange County is one of them, right? But if you're in LA County, I mean, just know that the city is paying, for legal aid to help your tenants fight you, right? I mean, there's three main companies in the city of LA that get paid by the city of LA to basically help your tenants fight you during an eviction. So, if you're investing in LA, just know that. And it's not that you won't win, it's just that it's more of a fight. If you're investing in parts of Orange County, the judges out here in Orange County tend to be a little bit more pro landlord than tenants. The state is, probably not as pro landlord. But if you're just looking at it from a purely return aspect, I mean, you can make more money out of state. The problem is that if you have enough units out of state wherever you go, that if you have issues and you have to fly out there, if you buy a fourplex and you've got to go out because you've got a tenant and you've got to manage it, there goes just between flight and lodging, there goes your profit for the next year or two, just handling that one issue. So, if you're going to invest out of state, I think you got to plan on doing it with some sort of volume. Otherwise, at least it lessens the value of doing it. Even though the returns are higher, you'd rather be, somewhere where you can just drive to and handle it yourself. If it's here in California. Now, with that said, listen, there's a lot of people leaving California because they don't like the tax structure, they don't like the culture or the politics behind it, and that it's so anti-business. But the end, I mean, I lived in Texas for a little bit, and while I enjoy Texas, I will tell you, our weather just is. I mean, it's so good. It's unbelievably good. I mean, it's like, I mean, it's just, it is, ironically, the thing I'll tell you that I miss the most, and I grew up here, right? I actually miss the mountains and the view that we got. Texas is so flat, and I was in a 3-story place, so I had a view, but it was all flat as far as you can see. And so,
where else can you surf in the morning and ski in the afternoon?
Right.
Yeah, see, the problem. The problem I have is like you don't know when the evil law is gonna stop, and every day they look at your pocket and they're gonna find the new ways or create like new laws to take the money off you. I mean, before the rent control in the whole California is unimaginable. Now it's become reality, and it's gonna be harder and harder to get rid of a tenant as long as it pays your rent. And now we got the rent control the whole state of California. I mean, I don't know when it's gonna become a reality that we're gonna like Seattle, that no eviction in winter because it's inhumane to kick people out of the house in winter.
Yeah, but look, we don't have the same weather that Seattle has, right?
Well, then the summer then.
No, yeah, but you don't have. It's not the same issue. Like it's.
I know. But the thing is, like the future. I mean, how do you? If they're going further and further to the left. I mean, right now for me, I'm very comfortable. But the thing is, like you have to look at the 5 years, 10 years down the road. I mean, what kind of law they're gonna enact to take your rights away from you, take the money of you as a landlord, and by the time if you want to move, it's probably gonna be too hard to. I mean. Everybody wants to. I don't know. I mean, that's probably one reason Bruce is leaving. I mean, left to California.
Yeah, listen. My guess is this: is that at some point, I mean, the pendulum is swinging pretty far one way. Eventually, people get sick of it, and then the pendulum starts to swing the other way. And there'll be a balancer. I mean, part of the problem with a lot of the things that happen politically, and I don't really want to get into politics, but and this is on both sides, is just the way the different politicking that happens with redistricting, that alone changes the ability for one side to win versus another, and so it makes it difficult. So you do get this pendulum that swings greater one side. With that being said, you're looking at one side of it, and there's still other aspects to it, right? I mean, because especially in Southern California, you got to look at Southern California kind of like an island. It's unlike Texas or some of these other metropolitan areas where, they just continue building out and out. We've got kind of the mountains on one side, right? That's a barrier. We've got the ocean, we got Mexico, and we got a bunch of farmland that you can't really go out and build on right now. And so you have this area in Southern California that really we're kind of like this island. And so because of that, we do have probably the biggest swings, both up and down, in valuation and rents and so forth. And it is, John, one of the reasons that like you make money, right? Is because of that. Because it's harder to do that in, let's say, an area like Texas, where people just start building out and there's not necessarily the draw. There's the draw to the new. So everyone's looking for the new, right? In an area like Dallas. You don't get as much of that here in Southern California. And so, there's, we can look at the negatives all we want, but the positives are still, they're still there. Now, are there more negatives than there used to be? 100%. I don't even think that's a question that anyone can really argue. But, there is, the ability to earn greater income here. There is the ability for greater appreciation. And, I think while that remains, you're still going to get more investment. And here's the key part is that look at it like from a big dollar standpoint, right? And larger hedge funds and Goldman Sachs and so forth, they're putting money here, and they have a lot more data and knowledge than you and I have. And they're still investing here. And so I think that while these companies that, are going to probably know much more than we can know because they're micro analyzing every single little aspect of it. I remember here, I'll give you an example. I remember thinking LA was kind of inflated. And one of my friends who he's a former partner. He sold his company to Goldman Sachs. He was telling me, he's like, no, here's why it's going to go, like the high end is still good. I thought the high end was like really too high already. And he's like, no, here's why it's going to go. And from a global scale, I was looking at it in our area and thinking like, wow, the buyer pool is shrinking. He's like, no, it's actually increasing. And I'm like, what do you mean? And he said, look, he goes, if you looked at like LA and Hollywood specifically, and those like Bird Streets in that area, he said they're trading at like 800, at the time it was like 800 to 1,000 a square foot. He said New York is trading at twice that, Tokyo almost 3 times that, Singapore, all these places where there's big money that would buy this is the buyer pool for these big houses. And then you got Hollywood, that thanks to the internet and air travel, right, that's much quicker than it used to be, that the people who can afford that, rather than live in a crowded like New York area, Hollywood's really attractive. It's undervalued. And the reason it's undervalued is because Hollywood has a draw to the celebrity and the weather and everything else. And sure enough, those 1,000 square foot houses, their 1,000 square foot houses are now 1,600 a square foot. And they have the ability to probably go to 2,200 a square foot. And so, a lot of it is that, if you're a CEO of a major company, no longer do you have to be like right in your office every single day when you can telecommute every day. If COVID showed us nothing else, is that a lot of these companies, like my friend that made more money, it's that as efficient as you thought you were, they figured out a way to be more efficient because they had to, right? And that is the ability, that I think that this period has at least created. But John, to go back to your question, part of I think what you should do is possibly just go through and say, okay, rather than say, look, this is what's getting taken away, how can you add some extra value to that stuff? And what is the tenants that maybe you can create and maybe add value to those units? Kind of like what we're doing with these 12 units right now, is we're adding extra value to attract that extra clientele. But even with the rent control, I mean, look at the rent control, right? It's 5%. I mean, we're not getting more than 7% appreciation in a year. See, it's 5% plus inflation. So, it's not going up more than 7%. So as long as you're not trying to catch up from behind, when you're going to market, and then, I mean, it's unlikely. And if it does go higher, like it did this year, it did go higher, it went to 10%, but there's already that has already peaked and it's starting to drop. And so you'll correct, and over a 10-year period, I think you'll be okay. With that said, yeah, listen, there's certain things that they can try to take away or charge you more, or, the big push is to get Prop 13 away from commercial properties, right? Okay, that's a big one. That's a really big one. And
Multifamily in particular.
yeah. And so, you know, if you do that, you might have to change the structure by which you hold, because the talk about it was for corporate owners and not just the mom and pop owners, right? So you have to figure out how you hold title, how you change. I mean, there are other vehicles to hold title by which you could save a significant amount of costs, but you have to be, you know, you have to have the right structure by which to do that. So a lot of it is I would say just restructuring what your existing, how you are managing the vesting or the portfolio already to still maintain your profitability here. And the other part is that if you just don't like it or you're concerned about it, yeah, just make sure that you pick an area where you move those funds to that is less management. And so if you're going for multifamily, I would look at your triple net type commercial stuff. I think that's probably going to be better than the stuff that you're than just the multifamily, which is traditionally going to be higher in management.
So you think it's still a lot of still okay to be in nano business in California? Huh?
I think there's some opportunities here. I mean, look, like I mentioned earlier, there's the guys who are building the fourplexes, right? And they're profiting 11,000 a month off of those. I mean, that's hard to do, and I'm going to say almost every other state, right? I mean, but that is a benefit of they're working the right areas. They're buying in areas that have been upzoned, and they're building. They're really overbuilding, you know, on those lots. They're maxing out whatever the max square footage is that they can do, and every room is an ensuite, so they have an option to rent them out per room instead of as a whole. And there's also an option to rent those out for, you know, to different county or city departments that'll just take the unit at market or at slightly above market.
Okay.
Just to follow up on what you said, saw several reports where international buyers are looking at SoCal, particularly LA and San Diego. And if they're looking at LA, San Diego, Irvine's right in their crosshairs also.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you look at Irvine, so they've just, you know, basically identified areas where you can build significantly more units because they were so far under the not just affordable housing, but also the unit creation, right, for the size of the city. That like listen, if you live in Irvine, that's not necessarily what you want to hear because it's going to overcrowd the schools and the streets. And one of my favorite things about living in Orange County is, you know, our roads are awesome. I mean, they're like wide, you know, you just drive to the market and you're on a street that's 50 to 55 miles an hour. So you fly there quickly because you've got 3 or 4 lanes. You know, I mean, I grew up in LA, and I mean, I have a car that I can't really drive to LA much because there's so many damn potholes that I know I'm going to screw it up. So it's like, you know, it's like, you know, so it's, you know, and it's funny every time I drive, I'm like, I love LA, by the way, but, you know, but I do think during traffic and all that stuff, or when it dents a rim, I'm like, I hate LA, you know, but so there's different opportunities, you know, I think you just got to find them and look around. And, you know, I don't know if you're syndicating your apartment buildings, John, or if you're just buying them yourself. But, you know, I would look at syndicating. I think there's still opportunity there for sure.
Nice.
There's a lot of money out there looking for a yield.
Yeah, everybody's chasing yield right now. It's hard. I mean, here, I was trying to fundraise for some stuff. It was right at the tail end of COVID, and everyone's like, I'm like, you know, and our returns are pretty good. I mean, we're making, you know, 20 to, I mean, unlevered, you know, 20 to 30%. And, you know, levered, it goes up from there. And we were talking to a friend of mine who used to, still does investment, but, you know, he's like, I made 82% last year without touching my his 401k. He's like, why? I'm not even excited about 20%. Whereas before he was like, oh, that's awesome. Let's do it. You know, I mean, if you look at Logan, if you look at his history, I think he ended up at like 1,600% for last year on his investments. 1,600%.
Sort of like what I showed in the example before you came on.
Yeah, he's up. I think the last time I looked, he was already up like 400% for this year.
But mine was a long time ago. Different things.
And unfortunately, he won't share his investments. So yeah. All right, guys. Any more questions?
I'd let him go, guys, because it's 10 o'clock, man.
Well, I can talk about this all night long, but
I know you can. Because I can too.
right?
Thank you so much, Robert. Enjoyed it. Got a lot of information. Thank you.
You got it. You guys got my info. If
Likewise.
you guys have any questions, feel free, text me, and I'm happy to help.
Really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for a good night.
I really appreciate you stepping up and being a friend and coming on and speaking. I know you're a very busy man, just like Bill Ted. I mean, I really appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. Thank you.
You got it. Thanks, TC, man. Good seeing you guys.
Bye.
Bye.
All right.
Have a good night, guys.
All right, Thomas, tomorrow.
All
Robert,
right.
I can't